Whenever you're ready to drift off, make yourself comfortable, let your shoulders settle, and let your breath find a slow, easy rhythm. Tonight, let's quietly explore for small corners of the past, each one steady and kind. First, we'll stand in a sunlit yard where clay, straw, and water turn into bricks that remember the warmth of the day. Then we'll step into a cool Andean room where chords and knots keep the stories of fields and roads. After that, we'll spend a night beside a hillside kiln, listening to the careful breathing of fire as bowls learn a green like rain. Finally, we'll visit a wooden bench in Edo, where a calm hand carries inked lines into a block of cherry wood. The pace will stay gentle. Simple words. Soft detail. Nothing urgent. You'll hear the small things, a reed mat underfoot, a scoop of water, a wisp of pine smoke, the whisper of a carving knife. All of it low and sleep safe. If your mind is ready, we'll begin in the warm light of a working yard. Clay waits in a shallow pit. A wooden mold rests in a pan of water. Hands move without hurry, and a day begins that looks much like yesterday and very much like tomorrow. The yard wakes before the heat does. It is a square of ground swept clean of stones, edged by a low wall made from last season's bricks. In the corner, a well ringed with fired clay holds a dark, patient circle of water. A long-handled pitcher leans against it, still wet from the last pull. The air smells like damp earth and a little like straw. Sparrows argue briefly on the wall, then decide the light is too soft for an argument and go quiet. In the center of the yard lies the clay pit. It isn't deep, only as deep as an A, and its bottom shines with a thin sheen of water. Someone dragged a flat branch across it at dawn, pulling surface water into slow waves. Beside the pit, a straw basket sits full of chaff from last year's harvest, and next to that a small pile of silt raked from the irrigation canal. The canal is not far away, you can't see it from here, but when the wind turns you can smell the green of it. Two people step into the pit with bare feet, rolling their trousers to keep the hems clean. The clay is cool. It presses between their toes and folds around the arch of each foot. They walk in circles, sometimes forward, sometimes back, crossing their own steps. When the clay is too sticky, one of them tips a little water from the pitcher and works it through with the side of a foot. When it feels thin, they lift a basket of silt and shake a soft rain of fine soil over the surface. The rhythm of these small changes has been learned by touch, the way a potter learns when a rin is the right thickness, or a baker learns when dough is ready to rest. A child brings the chaff, dry and light, and scatters it by handfuls. The fibers catch the clay like tiny threads. Chaff keeps the bricks honest. Without it, a brick can't forget to crack when the sun pulls water too quickly from its body. With it, the brick remembers to hold together. The child steps back, a little proud of the dust cloud, and watches the cloud settle on their toes. Near the pit, a shallow tray of water holds two wooden molds. Each mold is a rectangle with no bottom, smooth on the inside from long use. One is single-sized, the other double. The wood is dark where it stays wet during the day, and silver where the sun has had time to think about it. A small flat board no thicker than a hand rests beside them. This is the scraper. It has a straight edge that has grown friendlier from years of scraping. The first batch is ready. One of the workers steps out of the pit and lifts a scoop of clay with both hands, letting it stretch and slouch into the mold like a thick cake batter. They press it with the heel of a palm to fill the corners, then lift the scraper and draw it across in one compass. Extra clay falls off in a neat ribbon, like a tongue of soft earth. A thumb rounds the top edges. The mold is lifted in one motion up and away, and the new brick stays behind, a perfect rectangle resting on the sand-swept ground. The ground here matters. It has been leveled by years of careful practice and dusted with fine sand. Sand lets the fresh brick release without tearing. Sand is one of the quiet helpers in a place like this. The first brick sits by itself for a long breath. Then the mold is dipped, shaken in water, set down again, and fed another scoop. The second brick joins the first. The third lines up with the first two and starts a row. The rows will become a field of rectangles that shrink with the sun, and the yard will look like a board game too large for any table. While the first worker keeps to the mold and the scraper, the second worker tends the pit and keeps the mix true. A handful of chaff here, a trickle of water there, a fold with the arch of the foot. The child carries a reed mat from the wall and lays it close to the first row. Some bricks will cure on mats when the ground looks greedy for water, or when a cloud threatens to wander across the sun. Mats are light and patient. They can be dragged a little if shade moves the wrong way. Before the heat grows bold, a simple meal appears near the well: flatbread wrapped in cloth to keep the dust away, a small onion, a clay cup with a pinch of salt, and a jar no taller than a hand with a sour-smelling drink made from yesterday's grain. The meal will wait. Work is a thread that prefers not to be cut too soon. A cart rattles once on the lane outside. Yesterday's hardened bricks sit in stacks by the kiln wall beyond the yard, sorted by how well they took the fire. Some carry a deeper red, some a pale, honest rose. The heart of the stack shows a color like dried dates. Near the top of one stack, a brick holds a tiny crescent pressed by someone's thumb before it dried, a quiet mark made without thinking, a record of a moment that did not ask to be noticed. The morning moves on. Rows lengthen. The mold and scraper find their pace, dip, lift, press, draw up, away. The child learns when to bring another mat without being told. A lark finds a comfort in the sky and keeps it. On the far side of the yard, two older children carry yesterday's bricks to a shade frame made from poles and a faded textile. They stack the bricks with fingers under edges, never on their faces, because a face is easily scuffed when it's new. Shade slows drying, and slow drying is a kindness. Quick drying breeds cracks. The yard has ways of not hurrying. Once or twice, someone kneels and lifts a corner of a mat to check the underside of a row. If the ground feels damp, the row is left alone. If the ground feels thirsty, a sprinkle of well water keeps the sand polite. A thin branch draws a line in the dust near the stacks, one more small tally for the day's count. Tally sticks and tally lines do this quiet accounting, and at weeks and the notches and lines tell the kiln how much wood it will need. By late morning, the yard is a calm grid. The sun is strong now. The breeze that travels from the canal carries the smell of green water and wet clay. The workers pause long enough to split the onion and share salt from the clay cup, pinching it between finger and thumb. Bread breaks with a neat sound. They sit on their heels, facing the rows, and eat without talking, not from sternness, but because the yard asks for few words. When they finish, the jar of drink moves in a circle, 3 sips, then back to the shade. A visitor would notice small things here. The way the scraper is re-wetted only when its edge feels draggy. The way a mold is set down a finger's width from the last brick, and then slid forward so its inner wall kisses the new face. The way hands brush off excess clay not onto clothing but into the pit, because the pit is where clay wants to return. This is not ceremony. It is efficiency that looks like grace when watched from a little distance. Far off, a cartwheel stutters on a stone, a goat complains politely, then gives up. Nearer, the well rope squeaks once as the pitcher rises and falls. The air trembles above the sun-baked wall. The bricks darken as they release their first water, then lighten again as the surface equalizes. By afternoon, sun will be strong enough to move to the shade frame, and a new set of rows will take their place on the sand. For now, the yard breathes in a slow square rhythm. Clay, water, chaff, wood, sun. A mold lowered. A scraper drawn. A rectangle born. The work is simple, and that is why it holds. By midday the light grows a little white, so the yard makes small changes to stay calm. A square of woven reed is lifted from the wall and tied between 2 poles to cast a slice of shade over the workbench where the molds rest. A damp cloth is draped across the scraper so its edge will not grow brittle in the sun. The pitcher goes into the shadow of the wall's ring, where water keeps cool without asking. Fresh rows have begun to firm. When a surface will hold a fingertip without taking a print, the child brings to narrow boards carriers worn smooth by palms and slides one under each side of a brick. With a soft breath held, the brick rises and travels the short walk to the shade frame. The boards are set down and the brick is nudged off with a patient push. It lands an arm's length from its neighbor to let air move through. Spacing matters. Aries as much a worker as anyone here. A second worker arranges the shade rows by. The eye is a good tool when it has seen this many days. Bricks go down with faces upward and edges aligned. Every third row is offset a half brick, so a hand can reach between and test for dryness later. If a corner looks proud, the thumb smooths it with a single pass. Not too much. Faces should stay as the mold made them. The mold maker, who also works the yard, checks the 2 wooden frames. He runs a finger along the inside corners to feel for small chips that would print again and again into imperfection. He holds the frames edge to edge and compares width and length as if greeting old friends. These frames follow a simple ratio 1 tall, 2 wide for long because it helps walls know how to meet at corners. The pattern appears in many towns across the plain. It is a quiet agreement between places that have never met. Bricks that share a shape help streets keep their line and drains keep their fall. The yard does not use numbers to say this, but the hands know it. Beside the molds a shallow bowl of fine sand waits to dust their insides when the clay feels a little grabby. Sand makes the necks lift clean. A handful pressed along the inner walls and shaken out leaves a whisper of grit behind. The next brick will come away with a sigh instead of a tug. The sigh is easier on everyone. There are rests in the day that are not pauses. When the sun climbs too high for comfortable pouring, the workers shift to quieter tasks that suit heat. One person takes a bundle of reed mats to the well, dips them, and hangs them from a line for a moment before laying them under new rows. Damp mats lend a coolness from below that slows the surface from drying too quickly. Another person works along the old stacks near the kiln wall with a small clay slip. A fingertip finds minor chips on edges, and the slip fills them with a skin so thin it will fire without a seam. This is a kindness to the mason, who will one day pick up the brick and find no sharpness to tear upon. The child counts. Counting here is a quiet game. 10 small stones move from one bowl to another as 10 new bricks leave the mold. When a row of stones completes its journey, a small notch arrives on a tally stick with a bone blade. Morning is a row of notches. Afternoon will be another. The stick will speak when asked, with no boasting, only facts: how many bricks the sun watched into being, and how many the shade taught to wait. From the lane, an ox carter leans on the kiln wall and visits a while. He has delivered bundles of brushwood and a wrapped stack of dung cakes, both useful fuels, though the kiln master favors slender acacia splits for the first rise. The carter speaks of a canal gate repaired upriver and of fish flashing in the shallows. He drinks a mouthful from the pitcher and leaves, his sandals tapping a courtly farewell. The kiln itself is quiet at midday, a long oval with a low mouth and a chimney squat as a drone. It breathes at night more often than day. Firings keep to evening because the air is kinder then, and because the watcher can read flame in the dark as easily as a potter reads slit under a lamp. But even when it rests, the kiln is a presence, a warm animal napping with one eye open. Bricks that went into days ago cool under the half-mudded arch. A stray puff of ash talks from a crack and then forgets its sentence. Later, when the sun has leaned west, the kiln master will open a low wicket, thump the arch with the back of his hand to feel how sound it is, and let the new redness meet the evening. In a corner of the yard, under the shade, one worker trims small slices from a dried lump of the clay mix and drops them into a shallow dish of water. The pieces soften and bloom. This tells the worker whether today's chaff is enough. If the wet clay slumps to mud too quickly, more chaff will go into the pit before the next batch. If it keeps shape for the count of a slow breath, the mix is right. The test is humble and exact, like most things here. The meal comes in the long hour when the sun seems to be thinking, not moving. Bread again, a little milk this time from a neighbor's goat, and a pinch of spice that smells of toasted seed. The brick faces glow faintly. Heat rises in sheets off the packed ground. The workers sit with their backs to the wall, feet stretched out, and let the wall make a shadow long enough to reach their ankles. The child uses a stick to draw a rectangle in dust, then divides it into smaller rectangles, then smaller still, until the stick finds the bottom and clicks on hard ground. A lesson hides in that drawing, though no one says it aloud. A wall is many small things agreeing. When work resumes, some of the morning bricks are ready to stand. 2 people lift them and build tidy stacks near the kiln, 7 across and 7 high, with small gaps between for air to walk. A good stack is an art. If it lists, wind can be unkind. If it is too tight, shadows become stale. A palm on the side of the stack press is likely to listen for wobble. The stack answers with silence when it is happy. A short distance away, a table made from 2 drums and a plank holds a few special pieces. These are molds for half bricks and quarter bricks. They are used less often, but they keep corners neat where walls meet drains or where a curb needs to come right. A slim scraper lives with them, cut from the rib of a large animal and polished by many fingers. The reed's curve fits a need the straight scraper can't meet, making a small radius where one will be useful. Such tools are the sort that never travel far, because once you have them you do not wish to misplace them. Here and there, a hand lifts a fresh brick and taps it with a knuckle. The sound matters. A dull thud can mean the mix was too wet or the mold not quite pressed into its corners. Those go into a separate row and will dry into pavers for muddy yard edges or be ground back into the pit as grog. Waste is rare. Even a not quite brick knows how to be helpful. As the afternoon starts to lean, a breeze returns from the canal. With it comes a small relief. The workers pull the shade square a few handspans to keep pace with the sun. The child carries a gourd to the canal path and returns with a handful of thin reeds for tomorrow's mats. Reeds dry quickly against the warm wall. They click when tapped, like light bones. Now and then a gentle commentary rises, not as a lecture but as a memory shared. Someone mentions how the oldest houses in the town have bricks just like these, and how the drains under the streets move with a soft slope that only a careful mason would trust. Another remembers how a cousin far downstream described a town with streets laid so straight it was hard to believe the ground had not been measured with a cord stretched across the world. These thoughts drift out and fade. They are not plans. They are reminders that small rectangles can teach large places to be orderly without a loud voice. A cloud wanders in from the west and rubs the sun with its shoulder. The yard answers with a simple change. You rows return to mats, and the shade over the workbench slides again. A time or two a drop darkens the dust and vanishes. Then the cloud considers and wanders away. The smell of warm straw returns, and with it a sense that the day will end in the usual way with straight rows, counted notches, and hands rinsed at the well. Near the kiln wall a notchstick from last season leans with its old tally turned toward the clay. It remembers weeks of making. The new stick will join it when its marks feel right. In a small town like this, records can be bone thin and still hold. The light softens. A cart squeaks again, smaller now as it heads home. On the far stack, a lizard takes a last warm patch for itself and then slips into the crack between bricks. The yard settles into a different rhythm, the one that prepares for evening and for fire. Late light changes the yard into long rectangles of gold and shade. It is the hour when hands turn from making to ranging, from wet clay to dry order. The kiln master ties his hair with a strip of cloth and wipes the arch with the back of his wrist as if greeting an old partner. A small knock with his knuckles answers full and even. The arch still holds from the last firing. He nods once, then points to the cool side of the yard where stacks have been waiting. Two workers lift bricks in pairs, one in each hand, and carry them to the kiln mouth. The walk is short, the steps steady. Inside the chamber, the setter kneels on a plank and begins to build the load. He leaves slim passages between columns so he can walk through the pile. A small wooden gauge, just a sliver cut to a finger's width, keeps gaps honest. Bricks go on edge, then flat, then edge again, a rhythm that makes the whole a little stronger than its parts. The setter's breath stays unhurried. The kiln breathes with him, though no flame shows yet. Fuel arrives in modest carts, bundles of thorny acacia, armfuls of dry reeds, smooth cakes of dung mixed with chaff. Each kind knows its place. Dry reeds wake the fire. Dung cakes keep a long, even hum. Acacia brings a brief, hotter voice when the load asks to climb. The kiln master stacks the fuels by the wall in simple pyramids, tallest at the back where the night will be deepest. Away from the moth, a boar breaks the brittle crust on yesterday's ash box and sifts the gray through a woven tray. Soft heaps fall like powdery rain into a basket. Heavier bits, still useful, go into a clay dish for later. The ash will help seal small chinks in the arch and make a cushion under hot feet. A narrow brush of tied date fibers leans against the mouth to sweep crumbs off ledges before the arch is closed. Back near the shade frame, the child with the tally stick adds one neat notch for each filled course inside the kiln. The marks climb in their quiet ladder. The stick says nothing, yet it tells the evening as surely as a bell. As the loading goes on, a neighbor woman arrives with a coil of rope and 2 jars. One jar holds water. The other holds a thin slurry of clay with a pinch of salt. The water rinses hands, the slurry skins small joints where air might leak when heat grows bold. She tests the mix with a finger and smiles when it shines a little under the setting sun. The kiln likes such simple care. A break comes when the setter reaches a point he calls the shoulder. Here the walls of the load lean in a hair's breadth, as if bowing to meet each other. He stands to ease his knees and looks over what has been built. The courses show their quiet pattern, no haste, no crowding, no carelessness. Someone passes a small cup of watered milk and a piece of sweet flatbread. He eats without leaving the mouth. There is still light to use. By the well, another worker prepares little door stops of wet clay. These will fasten the last bricks to the arch and seal the peepholes that let the watcher read the color within. He rolls the clay into eggs, places them on a reed tray, and covers the tray with a damp cloth so the eggs stay friendly until needed. A brief commentary drifts on the air, offered like a leaf set on water. Someone recalls how, in a flood season long ago, the town pulled the kiln's roof down to use the bricks in a quick wall against high water, then built the arch again with the same pieces when the river settled. The kiln did not mind living twice, the person says. Bricks enjoy second lives. They are young for a long time. Shadows lengthen. A pale moth circles the warm arch, and then thinks better of it, choosing the wall instead. The kiln master runs a palm across the top courses and picks a stray reed fiber out of a joint. He gestures to the fuel stacks. It is time to build the first small fire. Two reed bundles slide into the firemouth. A shard serves as a shovel. A twist of dry grass touches a tiny flame from a lamp and carries it in. The fire begins shy, then learns itself, as small flames do. The kiln does not roar, it whispers. A gentle hand with a folded mat fans the mouth just enough to invite a draft. The setter sits beside the opening and listens. He has a voice that is not exactly a sound. It is a change in the way air touches skin. While the early fire wakes, another teen finishes the arch closure. A last course crosses the top, brick to brick, with the wet clay eggs now pressed into joints like seals on a jar. A thin gap remains for watching. The kiln master uses a smooth stick, charred at one end from many nights like this, to mark 2 small peepholes at eye level. These look into the duct between columns, where color tells the truth. Wet clay seals around the holes, snug but willing. The earthen floor by the mouth is swept and dampened. Dry dust steals heat, a little water brings it back. Someone sets a kettle near the ash box so the watcher can make tea when darkness sits down. A leather cloak hangs on a peg in case the night grows windy. A small stool waits near the peepholes. At the far wall, stacks for tomorrow's loading are drawn into the kiln's shadow, where they will cool a touch and be easier to handle. The child moves the 10 counting stones back to their first bowl. The stick has taken over the story for the night. Dusk settles fully. The kiln mouth glows the color of ripe peach. Inside, bricks begin to blush. The watcher places one dung cake on the small fire and waits for its language. It smolders, slow and even. Good. He adds a slender acacia stick on top to bridge the fire myth and carry flame deeper. A pulse of warmth lifts toward the arch. The first peephole opens with a little push of the clay plug. The watcher leans close. The color within is still soft, more candlelight than coal, so he closes the hole and lets patience do the next work. Beyond the wall, a cart rattles toward the lane and fades. A dog shapes itself into a circle beside the warm bricks and sighs. The yard becomes a place of fewer movements. Only those that matter remain: feed, wait, listen, seal, and open again. The kiln is a book being read in heat. Each page should be turned slowly. As the evening deepens, a low wind slides along the ground. The watcher stands and feels, for drafts are on the arch, palming each joint. Where a breath escapes, the dab of clay smooths it. The kiln needs to keep its talk inside. He checks the chimney at the far end. A thin thread of smoke writes on the sky. He lifts a towel off a side vent, then settles it back. Tiny changes make big differences when hours stretch like thread. Tea is poured into a small cup thick enough to keep warm. The watcher holds it with both hands and looks through the first hole again. Inside, the glow has turned from apricot toward a berry color, deeper and rounder. He notes the change on a shard with a charcoal nub. Good shift. Add one reed bundle. The shard goes face up on a brick. No one else needs to read it tonight, but the habit is kind to memory. In the quiet, the kiln teaches something that the yard already knows. Many small acts, done without hurry, make a whole. A brick does not require words, yet it carries a standard. A kiln does not keep time with a bell, yet it moves through hours like a steady song. The town will need both the silent measure of the brick and the slow temper of the fire when walls rise and drains turn corners that never quarrel. The moon, thin as a scraped slip, sets its own mark above the yard. The watcher adds one more cake to the mouth and listens to the kiln answer. It answers like a deep breath taken in sleep. Night has settled into the corners, and the yard is a small island of warmth. The kiln's mouth glows like fruit behind leaves. The watcher rests on the stool, then stands again, as the work asks for small moves rather than long ones. A reed bundle slides in. A clay plug closes one peephole while the other opens with a gentle twist. Inside, the color has deepened from berry to a wine-dark bloom. He nods to himself. Heat is not a ladder you run up, it is a road you walk and check with your feet. Another pair of hands arrives to share the hours. The younger man carries a small basket holding 3 thin slivers of clay taken from yesterday's mixing pit. They are witnesses, not special, just familiar. When the watcher thinks the fire has reached a certain steadiness, he places one sliver on a narrow ledge inside. Later, He will draw it out with iron tongs and listen to its sound. A clear ring says the body is waking towards stone. A dull thud says the heart is still damp. This is not science with numbers. It is a conversation with heat carried on in simple syllables. Fuel has its own watches. Reeds keep the flame lively without pushing. Dung cakes hum like a cord held long. A thin acacia stick bridges the small spaces when a pulse is needed. The younger man lays the bundles in reach, sorted by purpose. He has learned to stack them in the order the kiln prefers, so hands do not fumble in the dark. The leather cloak shifts on its peg when a breeze curls around the wall. The kettle breathes a small mist. Tea is poured again. Somewhere down the lane, a herder coughs. Then silence folds back over the fields. Above, the stars are ordinary and endless. The watcher knows a few by habit, the one that stands above the well at midnight, the one that seems to walk toward the ridge before dawn. He does not name them tonight. He counts by color and by breath. A quiet aside rides the steam from the cup. In many river towns, fires like this burn in simple clamps, built outside and used once. Here the arch stands, and loads come and go. Different places, different ways. Bricks still find their temper by patience. The thought drifts away with no need to settle. The watcher opens the first peephole and reaches in with the iron hook. A witness sliver comes out and lands on a patch of clean sand. He waits, then taps it with a small stick. The sound is nearly right. He marks the shard note with a cross and the simple word for good. Then he adds one cake to the mouth and eases the tile on the side vent a breath thinner. The kiln changes its tone, not louder, just rounder. He closes the hole and sits. Far from the mouth, on the cool side of the yard, tomorrow's nixing pit sleeps under a straw cover. Clay holds night ere the way a reed mat holds sunlight. Two geckos chase each other along the wall and agree on who owns which crack. The dog by the warm bricks resettles, a soft circle folding tighter. The kiln is the only thing that practices wakefulness now. Time walks slowly to a turning point the watcher calls holding. It means neither climb nor fall, a gentle straight path where heat soaks through the load and makes corners honest. During this stretch, fuel comes smaller and more often. The younger man breaks a dung cake in halves and quarters, stacks them like game pieces, and feeds them one by one. The watcher strokes the clay seals along the arch and finds no leaks. He opens the second hole and watches a change too subtle to name. It is like the difference between red fruit in shade and the same fruit in sun. He notes it without words, only a small dot next to the last mark. He walks to the far end and lifts the tile off the chimney mouth just a fraction. A higher pull can make the fire impatient. He returns the tile to its place. The breeze at the wall finds his sleeve and moves on. The arch, freshly smooth, keeps its line. Near the ash box, the boy woken again for a small task brings to flat biscuits of clay he made before dusk. They carry a pressed mark from a carved scrap. The mark is not a seal of status, it is a memory, a symbol used by this yard to tell its bricks from another yard's bricks when the stacks mingle at a building site. The watcher smiles and presses one biscuit against a warm brick by the mouth so the sign will dry before dawn. Simple signs, simple pride. Now the kiln asks for a modest rise. The watcher feeds a few longer sticks across the mouth, their ends propped so flame travels. He counts his breath slow, even until the sticks fold into orange and fall. Another witness sliver goes in. Tea becomes water. A scrap of sweet fennel seed finds his palm, and he chews it absent-mindedly. The younger man checks the sand edge with a stick and dampens a dry patch. A coal tries to wander and is swept home. Inside the store shed, the tally stick from the day's molding leans where the child left it. Its notches hold a quiet staircase. Tomorrow new steps will climb, but tonight the story is heat. The watcher hears a small tick, the sound of a thin flake on the arch, taking a breath and letting it go. He runs a smear of clay across the place and smooths it with his thumb until the surface is whole. Thumb, clay, arch, 3 soft tools doing a small kindness. Midnight passes unnoticed, then noticed. The younger man stands and rolls his shoulders. He takes a slow walk to the well and back, touching the rim with his fingertips, as if greeting water for later. He returns and lays a few reeds in a neat bundle on the mouth. The watcher opens the hole and draws the second witness sliver. On the sand, it cools to a shade that is almost stone. The tap rings truer now. He writes another small cross, then the mark for hole the little. The kiln is close to the place where bricks gain their long patience. Another aside arrives, as a thought set down like a tool. Some builders prefer bricks with a softer heart for inner walls. Some want bodies fired higher for drains and steps. The same kiln can answer both, the watcher muses, when the hand on its breath is gentle. The mind does not linger on this. The night offers no puzzles to solve, only tasks in a row. The horizon begins to loosen its black edge. Not light yet, only the idea of light, a thinning where fields will wake. In that gray, sounds return, a low, far drum of cartwheels on compact earth, to notes from a bird sorting its throat, a creak as the leather cloak settles again. The watcher adds one last acacia stick and closes the peephole for a time. Holding is nearly done. The soak has reached the innermost stack, the bricks that always take longest to learn the lesson. He and the younger man swap places without speech. One sits, one stands, one listens, one tends. The kettle empties and is refilled from a jar. Steam clouds the mouth for a heartbeat and vanishes. The dog lifts its head, decides no news has arrived, and settles again. Dawn will come in a handful of small changes rather than a single start. The kiln will ask for a quiet fall, then a slow easing to keep new stone from tiring too quickly. The watcher runs a palm over the arch one more time and feels both heat and balance. He looks up at the paling east and down into the glow. The night has done its work without fuss. Bricks inside are learning their ring, their edge, their future walls. Outside, the yard is a sketch waiting for daylight to color it in. The watcher closes his eyes for 3 breaths, opens them, and writes one last note on the shard. Beginnings when birds speak. The first thin bird song arrives like a small thread, and the watcher answers by changing nothing at all. He lets the kiln keep its even breath while day loosens the dark. When shapes return to the yard, the well-rimmed, the reed mats, the sleeping dog, he lifts the tile over the flue a finger's width and begins the long, careful easing the shard no promised. Cooling is also a kind of firing. The mouth keeps its clay seal. Fuel pauses. Heat spreads itself gently through the load so edges will not pout and faces will not lift. The younger man rakes a neat bank of ash away from the threshold and pats the earth flat with the back of his shovel. They speak little. Hands know the order. Morning work begins around them like a circle widening. At the mixing pit, two women pour well water and fold last evening's clay with their bare feet, steady and slow, the way a song walks rather than runs. The child chalks a new row of marks on the tally stick, then sets it by the pit with the old ones. A basket of chaff arrives from a neighbor. It sifts through fingers like light straw rain and disappears into the clay. A small goat bell tinks as a boy leads animals past the wall, the sound walking away in even steps. Now and then, the watcher opens a peephole and looks into the kiln's soft heart. The glow has changed from berry red to a deeper copper rose. He closes the hole and smooths the seal with a damp thumb. The arch answers with a faint, satisfied tick. He writes nothing now, the notes are done. The rest belongs to time. By mid-morning, the yard smells of wet earth and warm brick, smoke and tea. Dough rusts under cloth and becomes flat bread on a hot stone. An onion divides itself into quarters that everyone understands. The dog finds a new patch of shade and declares it perfect. The watcher chews fennel again and lets his jaw relax. A quiet aside lights on the mind like a small bird on a low branch. Many towns along this river know a shared habit for size. Bricks here often keep a familiar set of proportions, one part thick to parts wide for parts long, because walls remember straight lines when pieces agree. It is not a law. It is a comfort. The thought lands and leaves. Near noon, the mouth seal is firm but cool enough to touch without flinching. The watcher nods. The younger man fetches the iron bar and the flat paddle. Together, with the calm of many repeats, they ease the clay away in slices, lay it on a reed mat to save for next time, and lift the small metal door. Heat breathes out and touches their faces with a dry hand. They step back and let the first sigh go by. Opening is not a single act. It is many small ones in a patient chain. They wait a little, then slide a brick from the front course with the paddle and set it on a square of sand. Another follows, and another, each placed with two hands as if greeting an elder. The first pieces carry more warmth than weight. They darken the sand beneath them and let the air find their corners. The yard gathers to this quiet ceremony. The women at the pit come to look and smile with their whole faces. The child stands on tiptoe and tries not to ask questions out loud. The watcher hands him the iron hook and lets him feel the way it balances. A cousin from a nearby yard strolls in and stays at the respectful distance that says admiration without comment. Everyone breathes a little slower. Testing comes in simple ways. The watcher taps a cold brick with the small stick. It rings with a clean, light note that lifts and falls like a spoon on a clay cup. He turns it in his hands, checks their eyes as the edges where planes meet for a tidy regularity, and runs a thumb across the face. The sand has printed a fine, even tooth. He smiles with his eyes and sets the brick in the good line. Another brick gets the same attention and the same place. A third has a faint warp at one corner. He sets it to the side for steps or drains. Nothing is waste. Every shape can find a home. Stacks begin to rise in quiet columns 2x2 with small channels between them so air can thread the spaces and carry warmth away. A reed is laid across every course to keep the faces honest. The child places a tiny chip of fired clay yesterday's witness on the top of each finished stack, as if crowning it with a memory. The dog supervises and approves. From the middle of the kiln, bricks come down with a deeper color on their faces and a finer ring. These will go to thresholds and corners, places that ask for patience and strength. The watcher sets a smooth pebble on one especially good brick and chalks a small mark on its end. Not a name, just a yard sign. The same simple symbol the boy pressed into those clay biscuits last night. When these stacks meet others in a builder's yard, the sign will point back here like a polite finger. By afternoon, the hearth at the mouth is a clean crescent. The last rows are out and cooling in shade. The arch stands, bare and sure, with new smear marks like faint cloud lines where quick patches kept it whole. The inside walls hold a bloom of powder that the women will gather tomorrow. Ash can be useful too. The iron door leans against the wall, a square of shadow. The watcher, unhurried, takes a single cracked brick that could not bear the soak and walks it to the mixing pit. He cracks it further into bite-sized river stones and lets the pieces drop into the clay. The women nod. Crushed fired brick, mixed back in small amounts, will keep tomorrow's bodies from shrinking too quickly. Old work tutoring new work, an agreeable circle. A cart arrives with a calm ox and a driver whose face shows he has napped well. The wheels find their tracks near the gate. Two men lift cooled bricks by pairs and set them in neat stacks on the bed, straw between every layer to keep edges from arguing. A list on a clay tablet receives fresh lines with a reed stylus dipped in watery slip. Cellar, count, place. The symbols are few but friendly. The driver sets his weight on the cart rail and reads the marks with practiced eyes. He reaches into his bag, sets down a string of grain measure, and promises to return with barley at next week's turn. Trade, like firing, enjoys rhythms. Before loading the last course, the watcher selects half a dozen bricks and lays them side by side along the ground. He places a smooth measuring cord along them and checks the length that 5 make and the height that 10 make when stacked. He nods again. Familiar ratios live in these. Walls will go up fast and true. He says nothing. He does not have to. The yard understands. Dusk hints, for the second time today, a softer echo of dawn. The kiln yawns and forgets fire. A comfortable animal go into rest. The arch cools to the same color as the courtyard wall. The dog stretches, then curls tighter, arranging itself into the perfect shape of a comma. The watcher washes his hands in a shallow bowl. The water turns the color of clay tea. He dries them on the edge of a reed mat and feels the woven pattern under his fingers. The younger man stacks the last iron tool on the shelf in the habit-worn place. The kettle is empty and satisfied. The final act of the firing is not in the kiln at all. It is in the way the yard returns to stillness. Mats lie flat, cords hang straight, and every stack shows its small witness chip like a quiet flag. Tomorrow will bring new clay and fresh molds, a warm arch to fill again, notes on shards, and tea steaming beside a mouth. The watcher, ready to sleep, takes one step back and lets his eyes hold the whole yard as a single, neat picture. This is the work, steady, shared, and without hurry. He lifts the small clay biscuit the boy marked last night, sets it on the corner of the first finished stack, and pats it into place with two light taps. The symbol faces outward. The day folds itself like cloth. Bricks cool into usefulness. The kiln, empty and pleased, looks like a smile. And as the yard exhales and evening gathers its gentle colors, we walk uphill and far away in thought to a cool stone room in the Andes, where memory travels by chords and careful knots. Stone holds night coolness longer than air, so the storehouse breathes a gentle chill even after dawn has climbed the hills. The door lintel is cedar dark and smooth from many hands. Inside, shelves of adobe run the length of the room like quiet benches. On each shelf rests a folded cloth bundle, and inside each bundle lies a patient fringe of cords and smaller cords, sleeping until they are called to speak. The keeper steps in without hurry. Sanded wool sandals whisper on the swept floor. He sets down a gourd of water, a small bowl of toasted maize, and a rolled square of undyed cloth. A strand of alpaca hair clings to his sleeve. He pinches it free and smiles at the way it floats before settling on the threshold. His tunic is soft and plain, woven tight, with a band of blue near the hem the color of mountain shadow. He opens the first bundle of the day. A main cord thick as a little finger uncoils across the cloth. Hanging from it, pendant cords descend in orderly ranks, some smooth cotton, some springy wool. Their colors carry quiet code: haze yellow, earth brown, river white, sky blue, llama gray, dried chili red. Each drop of color once set in a clay pot of dye warmed by coals and stirred with a stick, and some still hold a faint scent of plant and ash when fingers warm them. Beside the cloth, he lays out his tools. A reed tube filled with charcoal for temporary marks. A slim bone pick for loosening a knot that must be retied. A shell weight to keep a pendant cord steady while his hands work. A string with tied intervals. A simple ruler measured in the distance between his knuckles. A small wooden tally board, its edge nicked with past days' cuts. Nothing sharp enough to hurry. Everything familiar enough to calm. He begins not by tying but by listening. Hands rest on the fringe and feel the story already in place. Under thumb and forefinger, knots rise like small hills, single knots where the count ends, long knots coiled to show unique groups, figure 8 knots set apart for special categories. Spacing matters as much as the knots themselves. The distance from the main cord tells a level. The rhythm along the pendant tells value. Wool gives the sign lightly. Cotton speaks with a straighter voice. He lets fingertips learn before eyes confirm. Outside, a pair of llamas graze near a low wall. Their jaws make a soft, even sound. From a nearby courtyard comes the click of spindle whorls as someone turns fleece into thread. Wine brings a mineral note and the smell of sun on straw. Within the room, the only steady sounds are cloth breathing as it is unfolded and folded again, and the whisper of cords as they slide across skin. A quiet aside is useful here. In this world, paper and ink do not bear daily counts. There is no alphabet at the market bench or the storehouse shelf. Memory lives in fiber, twist, color, spacing, and the practice of hands. This is not a lack. It is a different habit of keeping truth. A person trained for years can read a hanging fringe as easily as others read lines of signs. A finger is a fine reader. The keeper lifts a maize-yellow pendant. He notes its position among its neighbors and the pattern of knots already there. Today we'll add the last part of the harvest brought in from the terraces above the river. He takes the shell weight and clips it gently to the pendants, and so it will not wander. With the bone pick, he loosens a long knot just enough to open a place for one more coil, then smooths the cord with his palm until the twist answers like a willing rope. He counts the ears in a woven basket set near the door. Not one by one, that would steal light from other tasks. He works in steadied bundles, 10 by 10 with a pause between sets, letting breath mark the interval. From time to time, he touches the ruler string so his eye and hand stay friends. A small pile of maize grows in multiples he can trust. He nods to himself, and the nod is its own little mark. Now the cord receives the count. The long knot tightens under his thumb, the coil neat and even, the spacing from the last knot remains true. Above it, a small gap stands ready if a later day needs an extra mark. He runs a finger along the pendant again from top to bottom, then back from bottom to top, like reading a quiet poem twice to be sure it has said what it wants to say. At his left, a different bundle rests, a Quipu for flocks. Its pendants are wool soft, dyed with crushed cochineal and mulberries, speckled slightly where the dye met grease in the fiber. He will open that bundle later, when a herd arrives with a count shaped by hillside and hoof. Flocks change more than grain does, and not always on the same day as the market. He eats 2 kernels of corn and a sip of water, then sets out the spindle and a fluff of fleece. New pendants sometimes must be added for a new field or a road that has been cut by the rain and now routes the burden train a different way. For these, he spins quickly and evenly, letting the spindle fall and rise, the twist climbing into the fibers with no knots yet, only promise. He plies to spun strands together so they will not untwist, then smooths the new cord over the smooth rim of a clay bowl so the twist learns to lie down. Later, if needed, he will dye it with walnut leaves to speak path in the language of this fringe. From a niche in the wall, he takes a little cloth roll tied with a narrow cord. Inside is a scrap of dyed cotton bearing 3 short cord samples from a traveling inspector who visited 2 seasons ago. He keeps them for concordance, a friendly check that his loops match the loops expected across valleys. He lays the sample beside the Quipu, studies the habit of spacing the traveler used, then smiles at their closeness. He is always pleasant when far places keep time together. Mid-morning light enters in a slope across the floor and climbs the wall without haste. He uses that light to examine older sections of the fringe. A knot that has slid along its pendant by the width of a grain is coaxed back to its true place. A loose fiber is trimmed with a flake of obsidian so it won't catch and confuse a hurried finger later. He rubs a cord between his palms to warm it, then pinches a figure-8 knot to sharpen its waist. Small attentions make reading easier when the room is colder and the day shorter. On the far shelf, a different Quipu waits, a census fringe for a cluster of households along the ridge. Its pendant cords carry colors for age groups and for who owes labor on road repairs when the dry month arrives. Near their tops, short subsidiary cords hang like small comments, carrying notes for widows, orphans, and temporary exchanges of duty. The keeper lets his hand rest on that bundle for a moment. It will keep until afternoon, when the sun slides lower and the room favors a different kind of thought. He returns to the harvest fringe and completes the last set of long knots. Above them, he ties a single knot at a higher level on the pendant to show the 10 group that the day has closed. The main cord receives no knot, It already holds its silent authority across the whole piece. He lifts the fringe by its top and gives it a small shake. Not settle. Spacing breeze. The story feels smooth. On a shard of broken pot, he writes the date marked by moon and task and a short sign for May's completed. The charcoal line is pale and friendly. He stands the shard at the end of the shelf like a label stone in a garden bed. Later, when a runner comes from the provincial center, the shard will travel with the fringe as a polite companion. But the chords will still be the true book. A shadow passes the door, someone leading a pair of animals, and pauses. The herder raises two fingers in greeting and asks, in the shortest words, whether there is time today to read the flock. The keeper nods and motions to the water gourd. He will tend the census of animals after one more pendant on the harvest fringe receives a brother cord set slightly away to mark a loan of seed taken last month and to be returned in kind. It is a small, careful addition, a notch in fiber to keep friendship steady. He ties the new pendant, trims its end neat with the obsidian flake, and strokes it once to teach it to lie straight. Then he folds the harvest quipu back into its cloth, lays the shell weight and bone pick above it, and smooths the fabric as if smoothing the surface of a pond. The room seems to approve. The air feels tidy. He lifts the flock bundle at last and sets it before him. Wool touches wool, and the day turns a page without a sound. The herder steps through the doorway with the slow respect of someone entering a cool spring. His poncho is sun-faded at the shoulders and dark at the hem where dew often sits. Two llamas wait outside, reins looped lightly over a peg. They wear small colored tassels near their ears, little flags that say which hillside they graze and which house they serve. The animals breathe out in easy puffs, mint sweet from a shrub they found on the path. The keeper gestures to the reed mat. They sit without hurry. The herder sets down a cloth pouch tied with braided hair. It is heavy not with coin but with the day's careful story. A few lockets of wool from animals he once noted as prime, a short chip of horn, and 3 small pebbles to remind him of births in the dark month. He will not need the pebbles long, the cords will keep the numbers better than stones can. On the mat, the flock quipu unfolds. Its main cord is wool twined firm, the color of cloud. From it hang pendant cords grouped by pasture. Some are gray for the high slope where lichens paint the rock. Some are brown for the lower terraces where wind rests. Near the top of each pendant, short children cords hang slantwise, set with the quiet intention of footnotes. They are for births, for animals traded to kin for a debt that walks and must come home again. A gentle aside belongs here. Many who learn about these cords later like to imagine a single code that never varies. It is pleasing to think that one not always means the same thing wherever it hangs. In practice, meaning sits in place, and order as much as in shape. A long knot says units when it sits low, but near the main cord it may speak about a level of counting or a special note agreed on by the line of keepers in this valley. The cords are a language with grammar, and the grammar is learned in hands and time. The keeper lifts the pendant for the ridge pasture. He checks the spacing against last season's work. With his other hand he slides the shell weight to the end to keep the line still. The herder begins in a soft voice that suits the room. 5 young ones since the last frost. 2 at the east stones. 3 near the spring. 1 did not stand. He pauses. A white female, traded to my wife's brother. He brings us potatoes when the river runs thin. The keeper nods, hum of acknowledgment deep in his throat, and the hum seems to follow the lines of the chords. He counts the births first. From a small bowl, he sets aside 5 kernels of corn in a neat row, then returns each kernel to the bowl as he ties a long knot for each new life at the lower station of the pendant. His thumb presses the wool, the coil lays flat, and the space between knots stays even. For the one that did not live, he does not untie a knot. He leaves a small gap marked with a fine twist of spun hair. A sign used in this place to point to loss without speaking it often. The mark is quiet and enough. The traded animal becomes a subsidiary cord near the top of the pendant. He ties a single knot toward the main cord and lets the line hang short. Its color dyed with walnut leaves to mean walk to kin. Beside it he ties a mirror knot on a second short cord that hangs from the pendant for the kin's house. Promise out, promise in. When the animal returns as a different good potatoes or labor, the keeper will touch these 2 small signs and close them like a pair of hands meeting. They turn to grown animals. The herder speaks by groups, not by names. 30 grazing well. For thin, they prefer the upper tract this week. The keeper's fingers travel the pendant. 10s are shown by single knots placed in the mid-station, units by long knots lower down. He sets 3 single knots for 30 and then lays 4 coils for the 4 lean ones on a little child cord that hangs to the side, because lean is a state and not a count by itself. On another child cord he ties a single coil and leaves a space. This little breadth of cord means he expects one to travel soon with a caravan to the warm valley. These expectations are important. They are small bridges between weeks. Outside the doorway, the llamas shift and sniff the cool air. Their soft feet leave no sound. A swallow cuts across the light and is gone. The keeper warms his fingertips against his teacup, then returns to the wool. Wool warms quickly, and warm wool takes knots with less struggle. He strokes each tied section once when finished, smoothing the twist so the shape will not open. They speak of fleece. The herder opens his pouch and places the best lock on the mat. It is clean and long with a curl that promises easy spinning. The keeper weighs it in his hand instead of on a scale, because his skin knows the difference between fine and coarse better than a dish and stone could say. He ties a small single knot on a top child cord to mark that one animal will be set aside as a sire for better wool. He adds a second child cord to say that 2 others should be kept from burr-laden brush. The cords begin to look like a family tree turned into weather, lines hanging like rain from a cloud. From the far shelf, the keeper takes a short sample cord with knots tied by a visiting inspector last dry season. The inspector traveled with a team and compared stories between valleys. The keeper aligns the sample's spacing with his pendant, nods at the closeness, and returns the sample to its cloth. A shared habit between places makes trade easier and arguments fewer. It is like agreeing on the size of a handful. Midday light finds the mat. They pause to chew toasted maize, sip water, and say almost nothing. Silence is part of the record. It keeps edges from hardening. After the food, the keeper brings out a fresh, undyed pendant he spun earlier in the morning. He ties it into the main cord between 2 pastures, making a new place for a small herd that will be kept near the stream for a month while a child learns to drive animals at a pace that feet can keep. He marks this pendant with a short die tagged to thumb widths of brown rubbed in with mud and plant to show that it is temporary. When the herd rejoins the larger group, the brown fades and the cord will be moved or removed. Nothing on a quipu is waste. Even a cut cord can serve later as a sampler for twist and strength. Another aside, gentle and brief, some quipus travel. Runners with strong legs and thin sandals carry them from one storehouse to another, from one hill to the next, like letters made of string. Others stay. This flock quipu will rest here most days, but a copy pendant knots tied in the same stations with the same quiet intervals will make a journey with a runner after the moon changes. The runner will not read the cords, he will carry them. Reading belongs to those who live with the cords and their households. Carrying belongs to legs and wind. They review. The keeper moves his fingers from pendant to pendant, from knot to knot, while the herder watches by feel and sight together. A small correction rises, a unique knot sits 1 grain's width to low. The keeper opens it with the bone pick, slides it up a hair's breadth, and presses it true. The herder grins the way a person grins when a tool fits his hand just right. The room seems to breathe out. From a high niche he brings a tiny bowl of berry dye and a sliver of cotton. He touches the cotton to one short child cord to mark sheer necks, just a reddish whisper. The color will not matter much in a month, but for these few days is a friendly lantern on the line. At last, the flock quipu has said what it needed to say today. The keeper lifts it by the main cord and lets it hang freely. The pendants align themselves by weight and twist. He watches this settling like a person might watch birds line up on a wire. He knows the picture of order when he sees it. He folds the quipu back into its cloth, lays the shell weight and bone pick above it again, and ties the bundle with the same calm knot he uses on his belt. The herder stands, thanks him with 2 words and a slight bow to the room itself, and steps out into the sun. Llama shadows slide past the doorway and drift upslope. Tea. The keeper pours a little water on the mat to quiet the dust, then reaches for the census bundle, the one for households and duties. Afternoon belongs to people counts, and the cords will be ready. Afternoon light rolls across the floor like a woven band inch by inch, warm at the edges and cool in the middle. The keeper shifts the reed mat a finger's width so the cords will sit in even shade. Will prefer steadiness. Colors stay truer when heat does not wander across them. A soft step at the doorway. The apprentice arrives with both hands under a shallow basket, elbows close to the ribs the way one carries a sleeping bird. Inside the basket lie new cords spun that morning, some wool, some cotton, each coiled into a little lake of twist. The apprentice is not more than 12 summers old. His hair is tied with a thin strip of cloth. Pride rides quietly on his muff, but he does not let it speak before the work. They sit. The keeper chooses 1 cotton cord and tests its pull. Cotton stretches differently from wool. It asks for a calmer hand. He nods once and places it beside a small clay spindle whorl, the whorl painted long ago with simple dots the color of river mud. Good, he says. The apprentice lets the word settle. He pulls a pencil of charcoal from behind his ear and notes a tiny mark on a sliver of wood to say that a bundle of cotton cords has been accepted. This, too, is part of how the numbers travel. Today's second task is the household census. The keeper brings forward a main cord the color of dry grass. Pendants hang from it in groups, each group tied with a small loop to show an elu, a kin house. Colors help: brown for fields near the terraces, gray for stonecutters' homes, a quiet green for the potter's lane. He smooths the cords and sets the shell weight at the end. The apprentice breathes to the same rhythm as the keeper's hands. Learning begins in breath. They begin with the potter's group. The keeper lifts the first pendant and feels its old story, a line of single knots near the main cord for households that have sent clay bowls to the storehouse this month, and lower long knots for hands available for road work next moon. He plucks the first child cord to see if any knot wants tightening. It holds. The apprentice opens a cloth bundle and lays out thin strips of dyed wool, a little piece for each roll the census will care about today. One strip is pomegranate red to mean older than planting age. One is smoke gray to mean too young for duty. The strips are not tied to the cords. They sit ready on the mat to remind the mind. Memory is a muscle, but even strong muscles like friendly tools. A gentle aside: in this valley, people are counted by households first, then by roles. The work requires farmers, weavers, herders, runners, watchers of the canal gates. Age matters for duty and for learning, but the cords rarely draw faces. They show the village as a body with many hands. The names live on the tongue, the numbers live in wool. The first house holds 5 persons of planting age, 2 who need care, and 1 who walks with a limp, and mends nets when others bend in the field. The keeper ties a single knot near the higher station to say the house stands below it. He ties a group of long knots for the 5 who can work the terraces, then a child cord with 2 long knots for those who rest. On another child cord he ties 1 long knot, and leaves a finger-narrow space after it. This is their mark for skill, but not in the fields. The apprentice watches the spacing more than the shapes. Spacing tells place value here. The nearer the main cord, the higher the count. He mouths the intervals without sound, like a boy repeating a song under his breath. Between houses, the keeper runs his thumb along the wool to ease the twist. He pinches out little burrs of fiber with his nails. Smooth cords keep truth, he says, soft and ordinary, as if he is reciting the way bread prefers heat. They pause to make a new pendant. The apprentice chooses wool dyed with walnut shells, a warm brown that says road duty. He ties it to the main cord with a lark's head knot and tests the hold. The keeper nods and gestures with his chin toward the spindle whirl. The boy understands. He adds a half-turn to the pendant, winding in just enough extra twist so it will carry more knots without sagging later. The keeper watches him work, then looks away so the learning can belong to the hands and not to his eyes alone. A neighbor leans into the doorway with a gourd covered by a cloth. "Warm chicha," she says. For eyes that count. They thank her and pour small sips into shallow cups. The drink smells faintly of sprouted maize and sun. The neighbor's shadow crosses the mat, touches the cords like a passing cloud, and goes. The room returns to its low hum. Now the canal warden's group. The keeper sets their pendant on the mat and considers the last month's knots. Rain went 2 days longer than it wished, and the warden's work was heavier. He ties a short child cord near the main line, 1 single knot to say that the canal south of the mill needs 3 extra hands next week. He does not write the 3 yet. That belongs to tomorrow's planning Quipu. Today's cord simply remembers that a request was spoken. He turns to the apprentice. "Tell me what this space says." He points at a small gap between two single knots high on a household line. The apprentice thinks, then answers, "A house that held a visitor." The keeper smiles with the corner of his mouth. The space means guest. In this place, hospitality lives in interval more than in color. The guest has already walked on, but the gap will remind the storehouse to account for an extra bowl of grain and a little more salt used during those days. The apprentice brings forward a bowl with a dice stone, cochineal berries ground to red dust. He mixes a breath of water and touches a thread with the tiny brush. One child cord gets a small red dot near its start. That dot is not a number. It is a flag for the future, an invitation to remember to ask the household about a grandmother's cough before the cold months deepen. Cords can carry care as well as counts. A runner stops at the threshold, careful not to cross. Dust outlines his ankles, breath rides his shoulders. He holds up a folded cloth, the seal a cord which tied by the steward 2 valleys away. The keeper accepts it with 2 hands, opens the cloth, and finds a small pendant inside pale wool, simple knots, more air than weight. It says only this: 3 families to arrive by next moon. Bring them to the high terrace. The keeper ties a short mirror cord to his census. Quipu no numbers yet, only the reply received will prepare. He wraps the messenger's pendant in a little paper of maize husk and hands it to the apprentice, who lays it in a jar with smooth stones at the bottom so it will stay dry. The runner drinks 2 swallows of water and is away again, his sandals whispering on the path. They return to the mat. The keeper opens the bundle that holds past days, a separate quipu that keeps memory of work already done. He compares the pendants for terraces planted, ours given to road repair, baskets of chili carried to the trading place. He does not expect the census and the memory to match. They should talk to each other like neighbors leaning over a wall. If something sounds different, eyes can look and feet can walk. The apprentice lays his hand flat on the mat and feels the faint ridges in the reed underpads. He closes his eyes and runs 2 fingers down the chords. 5, 3, 1 and a space, he says, barely more than breath. The keeper listens, counting the count. The boy is learning the quipu by touch now, not only by sight. That is the way of this room. In dim light, truth should still be reachable. A small repair waits at the edge of the mat, a frayed pendant whose twist has loosened from years of retying. The keeper brings out a little gourd of glue made from boiled skin and bone. He softens a fingertip worth between palms, rubs it into the tired place, and runs the cord across his thigh to coax the fibers to lie together. He ties a tiny binding knot at the tired point and presses it gently with the back of a spoon. Repairs are quiet. They extend the life of memory the way a patch extends the life of a sleeve. Shadows lengthen. The keeper looks once toward the doorway where the mountain shows its blue shoulder. He aunties the shell weight and lets the cords fall softly into his lap. Enough for today, he says. They wrap the census quipu in a cloth whose pattern means people and duties, the design older than either of their hands. The apprentice slips the bundle onto the shelf between the ledger of flocks and the record of terraces, each in its place, each with its own small stone to guard against forgetting. They sweep the mat with a palm broom, drink the last of the chicha, and wash their fingers in a shallow bowl so no oil will sleep in the wool overnight. Outside, llamas step past, bells faint as a thought that will return tomorrow. And as the cool rises from the floor, the keeper turns his gaze toward the door where evening collects, readying the room for night work of another kind, the weighing of glaze, and the listening for fire. On a far hillside we have yet to reach. Evening steps in by degrees. First the doorway cools. Then the reed mat gives back the day's warmth and turns quiet under the hands. The keeper brings out a second bundle from the shelf. It is the tribute Quipu, heavier, with colors that speak of fields and storehouses rather than people. Browns for maize. Soft yellow for chugo made from white potatoes. Deep gray for llama wool. Thin green for herbs dried in shade. Each color sits where it should, tied to a main cord the color of river silk. He lays it on the mat and sets the shell weight. The apprentice brings a small lamp. The wick drinks, then steadies. Light falls over the cords like warm water over stones. Outside, a llama coughs and then goes still. Far on the slope, a bell answers itself once and is done. They begin with the maize pendant. The keeper touches the knots that stand for last moon's count. A long knot high. 3 long knots lower. Then a little step of space. These are tens and ones, held by where they sit. He murmurs the numbers as breath, not as speech. The apprentice watches his fingers more than his mouth. He knows that a quipu tells place by distance from the spine. He is learning that eyes help, but the hands must lead. A gentle aside. In many valleys, numbers are shaped by position more than by signs. Here, a single long knot near the spine may mean 5 tens, while a string of small single knots lower down means units. It is a calm kind of arithmetic. The hands learn it first. The mind follows their path. The keeper reaches for a flat basket that holds the ledger slivers. Each sliver carries marks for baskets carried in and baskets carried out. The apprentice reads the lines by finger. He matches them to the knots by count and by place. He taps once on a sliver when a tally kisses a knot exactly. He taps twice if he wants to check again. Tonight there are more single taps than double. The storehouse has been orderly. He brings forward a practice cord for the apprentice. It is thick cotton, undyed, soft as old cloth. Make the number 426, he says. The boy breathes, ties one long knot at the tens place, then another long knot. Then he moves his hand down and sets 6 single knots with care. He leaves a small space between the 2 places, the width of his smallest finger. The keeper nods and turns the cord to show how it reads the same by touch from either side when the spacing is true. Spacing keeps truth, he repeats, and the words are plain like bread. They move to wool. The pendant for wool is cool and springy. The keeper brushes it with his palm to wake the twist. He reads the long knots, then reaches for a bundle of fleece samples tied to a reed. Each sample is a year's shade, sun-bleached, mountain gray, river brown. He ties a little tag near the pendant for the flock that gave the most this month. The tag is a nothing of thread, but later, when the wool is washed and spun, the tag will remember the path backwards if a weight feels wrong. This is how the cords carry not only number but source. They rest. The apprentice pours warm water from a gourd into 2 shallow cups. A handful of herbs steep. The air tastes of mint and smoke and mountain night. They eat a small bowl of hominy and then olive of salt. The lamp burns lower and steadies again. Night work continues with a mirror quipu. It is a second cord made in simple colors, no dyes that could confuse the eye in dim light. On it, they copy only totals fields planted, grain moved, wool weighed, to quipus for one memory. If a moth finds a cord or a spill takes it, the other survives. The apprentice holds the mirror quipu while the keeper ties. He whispers each number as the knot settles, a soft chant without tune. A moth circles the lamp, and then lives in shadow again. The keeper opens a small pouch and takes out dry leaves of mucus. He rubs them between his palms and breathes their scent into the cords. This keeps moths polite. He does this as habit, not as worry. Small steps keep long memory safe. He turns to the apprentice and shows to pendants that twist in opposite ways, one spun S, one spun Z. Read them, he says. The boy runs his thumb along the lay, first one, then the other. This one is for fields, he says. It turns like the terrace wall when you walk up slope. And this one, the boy smiles without showing teeth, for flocks. It turns like a horn, the keeper's eyes warm. Twist can be a code. It is not always so. Here, it is one more quiet help to the future reader. The census quipu from the afternoon returns to the mat. They place it beside the tribute quipu so that people and goods can look at one another. Do the hands match the baskets? Do the flocks match the blankets promised next frost? The keeper moves back and forth with small nods. When something stands out a high knot where a low one might live, he puts a tiny reed sliver through the loop above it. That splinter is a flag for tomorrow's talk, not for tonight's worry. He will walk to the terrace owner's house when the sun is a hand above the ridge, and they will speak with tea and with shade. Beyond the doorway the sky deepens. Stars appear where they belong, one by one, like knots on a heavenly cord. The apprentice leans and listens for the town's last sounds to steps in the lane. A pot set onto a shelf. A child turning over on a reed mat. The storehouse exhales. The room breathes with it. They bring out the small proof quipu, the cord with 1 or 2 sample numbers used to teach. The boy ties the number for 80 without looking. He places the long knot high, then adds a blank place below, then one small single knot at the very end. The keeper tilts the cord and runs his fingers along it as if reading a story in the dark. 81, he says. The boy laughs once, soundless. He forgot the small one. He ties it and sits straighter. Now the keeper says, make 0. The apprentice smiles. He leaves the pendant plain and tight, no knots, just presence. Here, 0 is a space. It is a pose that matters. They put away the teaching cord and wrap the mirror quipu. The keeper uses a strip of cloth printed with little step designs to mean totals. He slides the bundle between 2 smooth stones so the cords will sleep without curl. He ties the tribute quipu in its own cloth, this one plain. The census stays out a little longer. He wants one more look at the guest gaps, the little kindnesses the village has done this moon. A runner's rattle does not come. The night is quiet. The keeper dips the brush into watered charcoal and notes 3 things on a thin sliver. Canal South extra hands, 3 families. Wool shade from high flock. He blows once and fans the slip. He ties it to the census quipu near the main cord so morning will find it without searching. They clean the mat. The apprentice gathers loose fiber and puts it in a gourd marked with a red cotton thread scraps for repairing old cords. He closes the door latch but leaves the top beam unhooked so can follow the mountain down. Before sleep, the keeper sets his palm on the bundle of cords. He does not pray aloud. He simply stands there and lets his hand remember the day the knots laid, the knots read, the spaces left to speak for visits and rests and small mercies. In another valley, other hands do this work. In another room, other colors mean other stories. Here, tonight, these cords hold this village steady. He lowers the lamp flame with a copper spoon and covers the wick. The room turns to outline and scent. The keeper lies down on a woven mat. The apprentice curls near the door, where the night air is a little cooler. The cords rest where they sleep on most nights between people and doorway like a quiet watch. And while the village settles, the hillside kiln beyond the far ridge begins to show its first faint breathing, a little blue caught in its fire our next road, still waiting beyond these gentle knots. Morning leans into the room as a pale band, then a soft square on the floor. The keeper is awake before light fully arrives. He lifts the census bundle first, feeling for the weight that means everything is in place. The apprentice sits up and rubs his eyes with the backs of his fingers. Night's cool leaves the cords, as if the fibers sigh. They sweep the mat with a reed brush so tiny bits of thread do not cling to the bundles. The keeper checks the main cord of each quipu with a slow pinch. No twist has drifted. No pendant sits out of line. He sets them in order of use: people, stores, fields, flocks, roads. This is the shape the day will take. A pot on 3 stones warms, then porridge. They eat quietly. The apprentice folds a clean cloth. He will carry the tribute quipu under it, never bare in the sunshine. Light can fade, die slowly, and slow changes are the hardest to notice if you do not keep a habit. Habits hold the work steady. They step outside. The air smells like grass that met dew and then forgot about it. The town faces them in simple lines, terraces, doorways, animals that understand paths better than maps. 2 women pass with baskets of greens, laughter low and easy. The keeper nods. The apprentice walks half a pace behind, the bundle against his ribs like a calm drumbeat. First stop is the terrace owner whose guest count needed a talk. He is sweeping his doorway. The keeper greets him by name and asks for a bit of shade. They sit on a low bench with a bowl of warm water between them. The keeper empties the census quipu and places it so the pendants fall in a small fan. He does not point to the knot that worried him. He tells the story instead: who visited whose mother, who came for plowing, who stood watch at the canal when the water rose. The terrace owner listens with his hands on his knees. When the keeper pauses, the man nods once. "I forgot the night my brother's boy slept here," he says. He touches the right pendant without being told which one it is. The keeper slips out the reed sliver that marked the doubt. He ties one small single knot where space waited for it. The cord accepts the knot as if it had always wanted to be there. They drink a little tea with dry leaves floating like tiny boats. The keeper wraps the quipu again. He leaves a small token, a twist of dyed thread, as a promise to bring news of road work days. Exchange goes 2 ways, even when the exchange is only information. The apprentice watches the man's eyes as they follow the cords. He is learning that some people read by color, some by distance, some by the feel of the fibers. All are correct if the story they tell matches the ground. Their next stop is the granary court. A gate pole leans while still standing firm. Inside, clay bins rest under thatch. The keeper spreads the tribute quipu on a clean cloth and sets it by the weighing stones. He does not call for silence. He lets the court keep its small sounds, grain sliding, sandals scuffing, a baby deciding whether to nap. He reads the maize pendant, then watches two carriers bring a basket to the scale. The scale speaks without words. The beam balances when it is ready. Numbers on cord and numbers on stone meet with a small nod from the weighman. The keeper moves to beans, then to dried tubers. If something does not match, the pause tells it. Today, things meet like hands that already know each other well. A runner passes the gate. He wears a small pouch against his chest, sealed with a pinch of clay stamped with a mark. He will not stop long. The keeper lifts a travel cord from his belt, a thin quipu that lives with him rather than the shelf. He ties 3 notes for the runner's path, a place name, the Count of Bridges, the Count of Rest Houses. All are done with short pendants on a single spine. The cord travels faster than a tablet and will not break if dropped. The runner taps the cord with 2 fingers and runs again. The apprentice grins. He likes the way motion itself becomes part of the memory. Back at the storehouse, sun rests on the doorway, bright but not yet fierce. The keeper and apprentice set the quipus on the mat again. They lay the mirror quipu beside the tribute cord and touch each total. The numbers meet cleanly, like corners that kiss without pushing. The apprentice ties a tiny thread near each place that matches, just as a tailor places a basting stitch, easy to remove but helpful while work is still in motion. A woman arrives from the next valley with a basket of dyed yarn. She smells of smoke and juniper. She is not here for number, she is here for shade and talk. She brings news of a road washed small by an early cloudburst. The keeper listens, and then walks to the road pendant. He ties an unnumbered knot halfway down, neither tens nor units, just a marker the width of a thumb. It will mean mind this. Later, when a work crew sets out with shovels and wicker screens, he will shift that knot upward and give it a count. For now, it is a thought made into thread. The apprentice carries the teaching cord to the doorway. 2 children hover, torn between play and curiosity. He shows them how to make a knot that holds a pebble at the end of a string, a game more than a number. Their fingers learn the turn that keeps the pebble from slipping free. They laugh and give the string a little swing. The keeper watches from inside. He approves. Memory grows by hands, the weight plants find water with roots. Noon brings a short rest. They lean against the cool wall and sip thin soup with bits of squash. The keeper pulls from a pouch his oldest cord, a pendant kept from his teacher's bundle. It is smooth by ears. The apprentice touches it, respectful. This one, the keeper says, taught me that quiet is part of counting. He does not mean speech alone. He means leave a space where someday another knot will live. He means wait a breath before you tie. He means do not grip the cord so hard that it forgets how to move. Work returns in small circles. The keeper adds a pendant to the flock cord for a family who traded a lamb for medicine. He marks a space on the people Quipu where a baby will soon be tied when he is named. He removes the reed splinter from the store's cord. The doubt that splinter marked was settled at the scale. The apprentice rewinds loose ends and smooths the cords with open hands. He has learned not to twist when smoothing. Twist takes memory away by degrees. Near the end of day, they prove one last item. The keeper takes a blank pendant and lays his thumb against it. He ties nothing. He slides the pendant until its knotless place sits between tens and ones. "What is this?" he asks. The apprentice smiles small and true. "The space that tells you the rest," he says. The keeper nods, yes. Emptiness with a job. They wrap the bundles. Each goes into its cloth with its own story facing inward, like a book closed to rest. The mirror Quipu stays on top so it can be reached first. The apprentice sets a little stone on the shelf edge, a habit that says today's cords are home. He slides the bolt across the door and opens it again. He closes it a second time. The gesture makes the body sure. Bodies teach minds. Outside, shadows have softened. A thin breeze pulls the smell of baked earth across the lane. Someone far off is grinding maize. The sound is a wheel with no axle, just a rock on a rock, the oldest music in the town. They carry the bundles back to the keeper's small house. He lays them on a chest under a folded blanket. He stands with his fingers on the wood, not pressing. He speaks one sentence, more to the room than to the apprentice. "The village can sleep," he says. "The cords are awake. Evening will return, and they will touch these fibers again. Other months will bring other colors, dried peppers tied in red, a new canal marked with blue. Winter will tighten knots, summer will make them relax. The cords will accept all of it without hurry." For now the apprentice steps to the doorway and looks toward the ridge. A line of smoke lifts and holds. A firing has begun beyond those hills. Heat will find clay. Flame will search for green inside blaze. He does not know that word yet, Celadon, but he knows the look of a night lit from inside. And as the storehouse cools and the Quipus rest, we walk east in our thoughts to a hillside kiln where careful fire turns pale glaze toward rain soft green. And a night watcher listens for the breath of flame. Evening folds over the low hills and one bright shape remains, the kiln long as a sleeping dragon, laid into the slope so heat climbs like breath. The day crew has gone. The chambers are stacked and sealed. Bowls, cups, and ewers wait behind a wall of bricks slicked with clay slip. Only the watcher stays. He sits on a low stool near the firemouth, listening to the draft pull a thin song through the flue. The first stars find their places. Pines blacken into saw teeth against a pale band of sky. He does not hurry. Night burns best when no one rushes it. A clay jar of water rests at his ankle. Beside it lie the tools that fit his hands by memory, an iron hook for drawing test shards, long wooden tongs with scorched jaws, a paddle for feeding the firebox, a tamping stick, and a flat tile for notes made with a charcoal stub. A kettle leans near the coals for tea when the air turns quiet. The air holds 3 scents, layered, resin, damp earth, and old smoke. He breathes them as if they were a prayer he knows by heart. The kiln is a slope-built tunnel, half buried, its arched roof plastered with clay mixed with straw. Small side ports, now stopped with plugs, dot the length like calm eyes. A stone chimney stands above the upper end where heat and gases leave. In the ash pit, a bed of gray remembers last month's firing. At his back, a pile of split pine waits in ricks by length, wrist thin, then arm thick. The thin feeds, the thick holes. He will climb those choices all night. Inside, where sits inside oval saggers protective sleeves thrown and trimmed rough, their seams smeared with wadding. Each sagger keeps sash off glaze and keeps one piece from kissing its neighbor by accident. Between shelves, little dumplings of clay lift bowls by their feet so the glaze can flow and pull without sticking. The glaze is river stone and ash ground to silken water, filtered and brushed on until it feels like cool cream. It will not show its true color until the kiln has given it less air than flame wants. A reducing breath. He holds that idea like a cup. Enough, not too much, not too long. He leans forward to the stoke hole and watches the first burn thicken. He has already kindled. The fire now asks for pattern, not spark. He feeds 3 thin splits, one, then the next after a count of 20, and the last after a count of 20 again. He leaves the door ajar by a small width of finger. The flame curls, tasting the new fuel, then stretches inward. In the spy port, a thread of color moves from straw to soft orange. He listens for pull, not roar. Pull is what draws hot breath the length of the tunnel so every shelf learns the same lesson. He marks the moment on the tile. First orange, door to fingers. He writes in simple strokes. The tile is not a book. It is a string tied around a thought. When the night turns soft, such marks keep the hand honest. Beyond the clearing, a stream moves over stones with the sound of rice being rinsed. A dog answers a far call and then forgets to bark. The watcher sips warm tea and feels his stomach quiet. He thinks of the day just ended, bodies bent over wheels, palms steadying bellies of viewers, necks pulled thin, spouts cut and smooth with wet reeds. He thinks of the basin where glaze settled like lake water, the skim of foam lifted with a bamboo ladle, the quick dunk, the drip, the turn. Some pieces wore carved cranes and clouds. A few bore inlaid lines of white and black slips set into cuts and scraped flat with a shell. Those are precious and few. Most are plain, made to hold rice, water, tea, and everyday light. He stands and eases a clay plug from a side port with the tip of the iron hook. A sigh of brightness touches his face. He shields his eyes with the back of his wrist and leans to see the fires run the way the flame licks low, then climbs the arch, then bends past the bag wall. He counts heartbeat beats 1, 2, 3, 4, then seals the port again with a twist of wet cloth and the plug. Too much seeing lets in too much air. He does not want that. A test sagger sits close to the firebox on a narrow shelf, its lip notched so the hook can find it. Inside it, a small tile was dipped half deep in glaze. He will pull it later to read the melt. Not yet. Early pulls tell little and cost heat. He waits, and waiting is a craft. He feeds another pair of thin splits. He slides a thicker stick across the sill so it can dry before it meets flame. Wet fuel steals heat. Dry fuel gives it back like a polite friend. He taps the damper plate near the base of the chimney, moving it the thickness of a rice cake. Smoke thins. The fire evens. The kiln hums. On the ground beside him, A tiny clay figure sits on a shard ledge, a kiln guardian pressed by a joking pawn. Its round belly and dot eyes have seen dozens of firings. Someone pinched a smile into it years ago. He nods to it, not superstitious, only companionable. The work asked for steady hands like friendly company. A moth visits the light and then goes. Crickets decide the hour is right for music. The watcher pinches the end of his charcoal and writes again. Damper small pull, draw good. He adds a dot where he usually makes a line. That tells him the night is cooler than last month's. Cool means slower climb. Slower climb means longer holding at the middle heat so the glaze can stretch and relax before the push to bright. He stands and rolls his shoulders once under his faded jacket. His hands smell of pine tar and clay. He rubs his palms on a rag that lives across his knee when the stool returns to him. The rag is stiff where glaze dried last week. It is a useful stiffness, reminding him not to wipe where fine grit would scratch a tool. Time slides. The first hour becomes the second without a scene. He sips tea again and listens. He can hear three things at once now that he is settled into the night: the thin rush of the flue, the small ticking of cooling ash at the edges, and the deep thrum that says the long tunnel is doing its work. He feeds fuel on count, adjusts the door by finger widths, and breathes in the way the kiln breathes out. At last he hooks the notch of the test sagger and nudges it forward a finger's breadth, then another. He says the numbers in his head so the move is smooth and even. He does not want to jolt the shelf. He lifts the lid with the tongs. Heat folds around his wrists and retreats. He draws the tile with the hook and sets it on the flat stone. He shades it with his hand and waits a few breaths for color to settle. The glaze edge shows a softened line and the beginnings of a glassy sheen. Not soup, not sand. A middle place. Good. He turns it and looks at the body where glaze meets foot. The clay there smiles a pale buff. He notes the view with two short marks on the tile and slides the test back into its little cave. He closes the fire with a sliver. He hears the flame lean. He leaves the damper where it is. The kiln now asks for patience, not push. He gives it that. He thinks of the finished color he is courting, green with cloud inside it, a wet leaf on a stone or rain-washed pole under willow shadow. That green is not in the glaze alone. It is also in the air he withholds. It is in the pine he chooses. It is in each turn of the damper and the quiet he keeps at the ports. It is in the way he waits between feeds. He sets the kettle closer and adds a stick to the warming sill. He squeezes his wrists and flexes his fingers. The small guardian looks toward the firemouth within. The night has only begun, and there is room in it for small thoughts and careful work. He writes one more note on the tile, soft shine begun, and puts the charcoal aside. Outside, the stream keeps its steady talk. Inside, heat moves through the tunnel in ways he can almost see. He settles on his stool, lays the paddle across his knees, and sends a quiet breath into the dark the way potters everywhere have done when the kiln is listening. The second hour leans into the third. Heat grows sure of itself. The watcher feels it on his face like sunlight seen with eyes closed. He rises and walks the length of the kiln slow and even. His sandals know the packed earth by memory. At each side port he pauses, Han held near the plug, not touching, only reading the warmth that collects there. This is a map his hands can see. A little cooler near the middle. A touch too eager at the firebox wall. He nods once to himself and goes back down the slope. He opens the stoke door the width of his smallest finger. He lays into thin splits end to end, then a third across them like a small bridge. He listens. The flame answers with a low, steady rush. Not a shout. Not a sigh. He leaves the door where it is and turns to the damper plate near the chimney. He slides it a hair's breadth. Smoke thins and threads itself higher. He writes on the tile, "Middle cool damper less. Keep feed." He draws a cloth-wrapped jar from a niche and dips 2 fingers into a gray slip. With a flat brush he seals a tiny crack in the mortar seam around the stoke door. It is not urgent. It is just good housekeeping. This kind of work keeps heat where heat is needed. He smooths the slip with his thumb and cleans the brush on the rag across his knee. The kettle hums. He pours a little water over tea leaves, lets the steam rise once, then once more, then sips. The taste is faint and kind. He breaks a rice ball in half and eats it slowly. The warmth settles under his ribs. He thinks about the bowls inside. Some are shallow and wide for noodles that steam on cold mornings. Some are small and deep for sauces and pickles. A few are wide-mouthed water jars with carved lotus. The glaze on them needs a patient climb. It does not like to be rushed. He draws the test sagger again. The tile shows a softer edge than before. The glaze shines a little more. He turns it in the light and then slips it back. He waits 3 breaths and covers the little cave. Early tests are like early fruit. You can see the promise, but the sweetness is still inside. Out beyond the pines, night creatures begin their slow errands. A deer moves through brush and stops. The stream keeps its silver talk under the sky. The kiln sound fills the watcher's ears until it is more feeling than noise of pressure, and a rhythm he can sense behind his jaw. He pulls the plug from a higher spy port and peers along the shelf line. The heat there shows a deeper orange. He lets the port breathe a little before he seals it. He strokes the plug's warm clay with the back of his finger as he sets it in. He takes a small ring from a bowl near the stool. The ring is a tiny loop of the same clay used for bowls, dipped in the same glaze. He feeds it into a wire and rests it near the test sagger with the hook. Later, he will draw it and watch how the glaze softens and rounds around the loop. This is how he knows the kiln's story without opening its mouth too wide. On the ground, a few pieces of charcoal have fallen from the stick. He grinds them under his sandal to make a little dust. He rubs that dust into the tile where his notes lie. The marks darken and hold. The air at his back turns cooler for a moment. He pauses. A breeze has shifted above the roof. He can feel the chimney draw change a note. He gives the damper a thin push inward. The flame at the firemouth leans back toward him, then forward again. Better. He feeds 1 split, waits, feeds another. He shuts the door a finger more and counts to 30 before he moves the latch. In this kind of kiln, the green they want grows when the fire uses more breath than the air can give it. The watcher does not say this in words. He knows it in the way a lamp knows its oil. He keeps the flame just hungry enough so it will search through the shelves and pull the glazes into a soft river. This is why the green comes. The iron resting in the clay answers the gentle want of the flame. It calms. It turns water-like. People will call it the color of rain. He likes that name. He walks the slope again and stops at the place where the kiln's belly is widest. He presses his palm near the port and smiles at the warmth there. He can smell the difference too. Early heat smells like pine sugar and sharp smoke. Middle heat smells rounder, like clean bread crust and wet stone. He adds a dot to his note tile. That is his mark for right smell. He sits and mends a strap on his glove with a length of wax thread. The leather is dark where it has met fire and ash. He pulls the knot tight with his teeth, then rubs the stitch with a touch of oil. He lays the glove on the warm sill to settle. On a shelf near his stool, there is a paper packet. Inside rests a pinch of powdered ash and a pinch of clay. He made the packet last month. He opens it and looks, then closes it again without using any. It is enough to know it is there. A watcher feels steadier when small things are prepared. He takes a wet reed and moistens the seam around the stoke door where it has dried too fast. Clay likes to be reminded to stay polite. The reed leaves a clean track, and the seam shines for a moment before it dulls again. The kettle hisses. He sets it back from the heat and covers it with a cloth. He looks at the little kiln guardian. Its mouth is still a smile. He tips his head back and rolls his neck once. The stars are thick over the ridge now. In the east, a faint pale says the moon will travel later. He draws the ring trowel. The hook brings it out in one smooth motion. He sets it on the flat stone and shades it with his palm so the glow comes. The glaze beads at the bottom of the ring and rounds along the curve. A good sign. He marks the tile, ring soft. He returns the wire to its place. He adds a thicker stick to the warm sill and turns it with his toe so both sides dry. He thinks of the foreman's gauge, a wooden wedge cut with numbers. The gauge lives in the day room. At night he does not need it. His gauge is sound, color, breath, and the way the heat on his face changes when the door is a hair open or a hair closed. In the morning, the foreman will nod at the load and say little. A good firing needs few words. He remembers the slip inlay on a water jar on the top shelf. Before the glaze, a carver cut cranes into the leather-hard clay and filled the cuts with white slip. When the piece dried, the surface scraped down until the cranes came level and clear. Under the green, the birds will look as if they swim in a shallow stream. He hopes the shelf above has not dropped ash. The sagger should keep it clean. He trusts the day crew. Trust is part of night work. He feeds again, thin, then one thicker stick that has dried warm. The fire takes it with a low glow. He nudges the damper whisper. He closes the door to grains more and lays the latch quiet. He listens for the draw to deepen. It does. Oars at the kiln move like slow brush strokes. Each one looks small. Together they make a picture. He writes that thought on the tile because it pleases him. Many small strokes. He takes up the paddle and rests it across his knees. He rubs his hands together once and breathes slowly. The kiln settles into a new steadiness. The color in the spy port is no longer the straw of early evening. It is a deeper orange, full and even, with a little tongue of blue breathing at the edge. He smiles. The blue tongue is a kind of promise. The stream talks. The pines stand. The night is wide and unhurried. He is only one small part of it, doing a small, careful thing. The dragon kiln glows against the hillside. It remembers every firing in its bricks. It will remember this one too. The night settles into its long middle. Heat has a body now. It leans at his cheeks and hands like a tame animal, warm and steady. He moves with small purpose, a stick placed, a latches, a note scratched. These are threads of the same cloth. At the stoke arch he lifts the door a sliver and waits before feeding. Waiting matters. He listens for the breath inside to ask. When the rush turns from full to wanting, he offers a thin split. The glow deepens, then calms. He adds one more, then closes to the same narrow seam of light. The hinge creaks a polite syllable and is quiet again. He walks to the rear damper and touches the iron with the back of his knuckle. Warm, not harsh. Good. A finger-width change here would shut down the shelves. He gives it the width of a reed. Smoke above the roof thins, then gathers into a higher ribbon. He watches until the line holds its place against the stars, then marks the tile with a small oblique stroke, his sign for draw lifted little. He kneels at a side spy and draws the plug with a twist. The sight inside is even and calm, a deep orange that hints at yellow in the brightest lanes between pots. He shadows the opening with his palm so his eyes settle. A bowl's shoulder shows a wet shine, not bright, not dull like fruit's skin in shade. On the next shelf a ewer's curve is a darker oval. Glaze there is slower, thicker. That corner wants a touch more time. He sets the plug back and writes north shelf patient. By the stool a shallow dish holds tiny clay beads, each dipped in the same coating as one of the shelves. He threads one onto a bent needle of wire, slides it near the test chamber, and sets the wire under pinch of brick. Later, when he pulls it, he will read how the little bead has rounded at the base. Not a number, not a scale, but a kind of yes or not yet. He pours a small cup of tea and holds it in both hands before he drinks. The cup warms his palms just enough to remind him of himself. The kiln's great body can make a person forget he has one. From his bag he takes a folded paper with 3 short lines. They were given to him when he started this work. Not rules exactly, but examples. Small fuel often, let the flame want, believe your ears. He smooths the paper and smiles at its worn creases. He has added his own line over time. Write what you smell. He does that now, touching the charcoal to the towel. Kind sweet less, clean bread more. The scent has rounded, the sharpness from earlier is gone. This is right for this hour. He turns to the wood stack and selects lengths by touch. Thin, then a thumb-thick split laid near the arch so it warms before it burns. He never throws a cold stick into a good conversation. He lets wood learn the room before it speaks. Down the slope a frog tries 3 notes and gives up. The stream holds the same soft conversation it held at dusk. The watcher thinks of the potter who carved cranes on that water jar and of the person who will someday fill it. He likes that a thing can carry both hands, maker and user, and be faithful to both. He draws the test ring. He brings it to the stone and cups it with his hand until the cherry glow fades enough to see. The glaze has gathered a little fuller at the bottom. The edge is rounder. He nods and places it back near the hook, not in the hottest place, but where a steady heat will teach it slowly. Rushing makes glass hurry past green into glare. He will not rush. He checks the little guardian figure by the arch. Ash has laid a pale veil across its head. He brushes it clear with the end of a reed and leaves a finger tap on the brick beside it, a habit he keeps without reason. The tap sounds hollow, then strong, then hollow again as his finger moves another way to know the kiln lives evenly. He takes a thin flat blade and scrapes a seam where mortar has glassed over from older firings. The blade sings a small note against the glaze-hard ridge, and gray dust falls like flour. A breathing seam draws better than a sealed scar. He smooths the joint with damp fingers until it feels like skin, not glass. Inside his sleeve a bead of sweat rolls down his forearm and pauses at the wrist. He wipes it with the back of his other hand and breathes out long. Breathing with the kiln steadies in. 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out. Not a ritual, just a metronome for small tasks. The clock of this craft is not a bell on the wall. It is a collection of returning feelings, the way sound sits in the ear, the bright that edges to yellow, the scent loosening into roundness, the tri-piece that sags a fraction more, the plug too worn to hold for long. All these are times. He steps to the far spy where the shelves turn a bend. He opens and looks. Flames lit from below and curl over the ware before sliding on. That shape pleases him, the curve that hugs and lets go. He shadows the opening with his wrist and counts heartbeats until the flames seem to move slower, which is only his eyes warning them. Then he closes the port and works the plug in with a twist and a press. He breaks a rice cake and sets half aside for later. He chews, slow and thoughtful, and with his free hand he reaches to pull the latch. A thin stick goes in. He waits for the sound to take it, then a second. He closes again and strokes the latch once, small good luck habit. The door's sheen glows, then dins to a steady line. A lesson his teacher gave him comes back now, at middle climb. Do nothing that cannot be undone. He smiles. That is a joke and a truth. He has kept to it. Every change tonight has been the width of a hair, a reed, a finger measures, that will not betray him. He draws a cup of water from the kettle and pours a breath over the damp cloth that covers the glazed jar, keeping the cloth willing. He lifts one of the test shards with tongs and holds it in the outer air for a blink, then returns it. The surface tells him little yet, just a softened sheen. That is fine. He is ahead of his hurry. Near the firebox a mouse has left small tracks in ash. He considers them with calm interest and smooths them away with a sandal before they draw hence. The small managements matter, fewer visitors, fewer surprises. Through the treetops a hazy moon has lifted itself above the ridge. Its light sits on the kiln roof like milk. He can see more of his hands now, less of the flame's inner color. For color he trusts the spy ports, not the moon. He keeps his routine. At the rear, a whisper of heat on his pointer finger tells him the damper could slide a touch outward. He does so and holds his breath to feel the draw's answer through the arch seam. The answer is a longer pull, lower in tone, the sound of a conch blown softly. He marks the tile with a tiny loop. Loops mean good adjustment, so he won't undo it in the next round of checks. He thinks of the shells, front to back, as neighbors in a hillside village. The first shelf sees the visitor. The last hears the quiet after guests go home. He wants all of them to have the same evening. Not identical, but fair. He feeds the warmed, thumb-thick piece. The kiln takes it like a well-timed bite of bread. He leaves the door open the breadth of a barley grain to carry a single stripe of light across the floor stones. He watches the stripe for the length of a short pole and then closes it. He sits, straight-backed, and lets stillness do some work for him. The largest part of tending is not touching. His hands rest on his knees, loose and ready. His breath is even. The kiln speaks in long vowels now, not the quick consonants of early hours. He writes that thought on the tile because it pleases him, vowels. A breeze passes through the pines and combs their needles. Ash in the firebox shifts and settles. He draws the small rake across the grate to keep the bed open, then closes the door again to its sliver and waits until the inner sound smooths out. It does. He smiles without showing teeth. When he checks the ring again, he will be nearer the moment where the green is possible. Not yet. The climb must be even and kind. He looks up at the moon and then back to the kiln. The moon will set. The kiln will keep its course if he does. He stands, stretches one shoulder, and touches the tile with the charcoal once more. Hold this patience. Then he sets the charcoal down, wipes his fingers, and warms his palms near the scene for a count of 8, memorizing the feel of this hour. Past midnight, the hill feels held in one long breath. Heat is deeper now, not fierce, just everywhere on the backs of his hands, along his neck, across the stones that remember every earlier firing. This hour is for smoothing the climb, for asking the fire to go from busy to thoughtful. He checks the side spine near the middle shelves. The plug turns with a dry whisper. Inside, the light has edged from orange toward a pale, buttery tone that wavers in slow waves. Flames roll over the shoulders of bowls and slide away like silk drawn from a basket. The glaze on a cup's rim shows a soft, what shine that is not a mirror and not a matte, something in between, like dew that has nearly decided to lift. He shades the opening with his palm until his pupils settle, counts a few heartbeats, and closes the port. At the rear damper he rests 2 fingers on the iron, feeling its answer. A little warmer than last round. He moves it the width of a hair toward closed, a kindness that keeps more breath in the chambers. Celadon likes a quiet shortage of air, too little and flame sulks, too much and the color clears to straw. He waits, listening. The draw lowers to a patient tone, and smoke from the top climbs straighter, paler. He marks a small dot on his roof tile ledger. Dots mean hand lightly, keep. By the arch he opens the stoked door a barley breadth. The seam glows with a gentle band. He lets the kiln ask, not his hands. When the sound inside rounds toward wanting, he offers a split that has been warming by the sill. The stick goes like a thought whispered to a friend. He follows with another, just as thin, then closes the door to the same narrow seam and rests the latch under his thumb until the hinge stops speaking. He takes up the hooked wire and draws the witness ring. He cups it against the stone so the red loosens to a dull glow. The tiny bead at the ring's base has softened and begun to round. The shoulder shows a quiet slump that pleases him. He notes a single slanted line on the tile and sets the ring back a thumb farther from the little chamber's mouth, where heat is even and less eager. This is the hour to soak, though he does not call it that. He simply keeps the kiln listening to itself. From his bag he pulls a folded scrap of bamboo slip with a fingernail groove down one edge. He uses it to score a tiny notch beside the last note how long this steadiness should last. The notch stands for the time it takes tea to cool from sip hot to gentle. He pours hot water into the cup and sets it near the seam of the stoked door to make a small clock he can feel in his mouth. He tends the ash bed with the thin rake, drawing two easy lines to open pathways between coals. Ash falls in a soft sigh, and the fire breathes more evenly. He leaves the rake with its handle tucked at the same angle as always, a habit that saves him from fumbling later when the light is not friendly. He walks the kiln's length, sandaled feet soundless on the worn path. At each spy he repeats the same small practice, plug turned, hand shading ice patient, nose testing the breath. Near the front shelf, a ewer's shoulder shows a bloom where ash has kissed and begun to melt into the skin. Not a flaw, not a boast, just a promise of soft drift under the glaze. He smiles without showing teeth and writes, "Front shoulder ash kind," on the tile. A breeze from the pine stand brings resin and night water. He answers it with a reed-width nudge at the damper no more. Celadon's green, the rain pond color he hopes for, lives in small courtesies, air held back a little, fire fed little, and often changes that could be undone. He remembers his teacher's palm pressed against his own on this same iron bar, sharing the feel of enough. At the shelf of tried pieces he lifts one shard with tongs and turns it in the edge light. The wash across it has tightened, hiding its chalkiness. He draws the bamboo brush through the jar mouth and paints a thin stripe of that glaze across a clay bead, then places the bead near the tri-chamber with the wire. He likes to see both a shard sheet and a bead's edge because each tells a different part of the same sentence. He warms his palms at the seam for a count, then rinses them over the bucket to remind his skin of cool. He presses his knuckles lightly to the mortar line along the arch. The heat there says the arch is working, not racing. He smooths a glazed scar from some early firing with a damp fingertip until the seam feels like skin again. His hand comes away with a dust the color of cloud. He wipes it on the hem of his coat and thinks, as he often does, that a kiln is both house and instrument, something to live with and something to tune. Down the slope, the stream keeps its patient counting talk. A night bird tries 3 notes and falls silent. The world beyond the kiln is simple and far. In here time is measured by little returns, the way the door seam brightens after a feed, the way the flame's bow lowers when the bed opens, the way the witness ring softens by finger widths, the way the scent moves from sharp pine to warm bread. He writes bread again on the tile, a private code for we are in the right room of the night. When the tea cools to a comfortable sip, he lets the soak continue its quiet work. He does not look for victory, only evenness. He takes the small wooden gauge, 2 arms pivoted with a peg, and checks the lay of a twisted cord he uses near the tri-chamber to feel draft. The curd's tail lifts and points with the breath. It holds steady. He returns the gauge to its nail, angled as always. He feeds the kiln again to thin splits hardly thicker than his thumb, and then a third no thicker than a chopstick. He has learned that 3 small kindnesses make a better hour than 1 large gift. Closing the door, He leaves the seam to draw a ribbon of light across the floor, a stripe he can watch without opening again. When the stripe dims a shade, he knows the last stick is thinking of leaving. He draws the witness ring once more. The bead's base has softened into a little foot. The glaze on the shard has moved past wet leaf toward quiet pond, still more gray than green, but the gray with blue behind it. He writes pond on the tile and, beside it, a small circle. Circles mean hold at this place. He returns the ring and wipes the tongs with a twist of straw so no bead of melted glaze will set and keep them shut later. A memory from a winter firing carries through him. Went harder than tonight's, flame stubborn, the old man's voice saying, believe what your ear knows before your eye agrees. He listens now and hears the long, low vowel he wanted. He lets minutes fall without touching anything, his hands resting open on his knees. Stillness is a tool, too. When he stands again, he checks every latch and wedge, not to change them, but to make sure his body remembers where each is. In work like this, knowing where things rest is part of safety. He sips the last of the tea, adds a little water to the kettle, and sets it back near the seam to keep it friendly. By the roof, the plume keeps its thin, steady pillar. The moon has slid down the ridge and lost its edge in a haze. This is the last part of climbing, close to where he will hold the top. He runs his thumb along the tile to feel the raised charcoal notes from earlier hours. The ridge of them is its own story. He opens the front spy and watches a full count longer than before. Within, the shelves glow evenly. The brightest lanes between pots are soft yellow, not white, the color he trusts. He closes the port and breathes out. The kiln answers in kind, as if pleased to be believed. He marks one more dot, and a short line his sign for begin the hold. The next stretch is simple to write and careful to keep. He will feed less and less, only enough to maintain the long vowel and the quiet pond. The green he wants cannot be asked for, it appears when asking stops. He sits again, listening to the clockwork no clock can show, seem like breath tone, ash fall, kettle murmur. When it is time to ease the damper reeds with or touch the arch seam with water, he will know. Until then, hands rest. The kiln thinks. The heel is nearly quiet enough to hear dew finding the grass. He has kept the kiln at its soft, even hum for a long while, touching very little, letting the night carry most of the work. Now the whole drifts toward its gentle end. The seam at the stoke door still writes a pale stripe across the floor, but the color inside the line has changed, less insistent, more like the inside of a pear. He knows this white. It offers a small bow as if to say the climb is complete. He opens the front spy only as far as a coin is thick. He waits for his pupils to catch up, then looks with steady eyes. On the front shelf, a bowl's rim shows a clean, round edge without glare. The lanes between pots speak in one tone, no bright sizzle, no sulking dusk. At the far wall, heat rolls in a slow, regular sheet. He closes the port and rests, his hand on the plug for a breath, the way one might assure a friend that the conversation is understood. He draws the witness ring with the tongs and shields it in his palm. The tiny bead on the ring side has softened into a quiet teardrop. The curve is neither shy nor bold. He notes a short cross mark on his roof tile. That mark is his way of saying, here. The tri-shard receives a glance as well. The wash across it is no longer chalky soft, It has smoothed to a sheen that is almost not a sheen, a surface that looks like water thinking of rain. In his mind he does not say chemistry. He says, as his teacher said, enough pine breath, enough rest. Time to ease the fire toward stillness. He opens the stoke door the width of a barley stalk, and offers one thin split, only one, setting it in the same footprint where the last few lay. The flame takes it without complaint, folding the stick into itself, as if it were a word added to a sentence that already reads clearly. He closes the door to the familiar seam and steps back. At the rear damper he moves the iron a reed's width toward shut. The draft hushes by a finger's measure. Smoke from the roof grows a shade denser, then thins again, settling into a straight thread that climbs and disappears. He listens. The vowel in the fire lowers a little, deep and round. He marks a tiny curve on the tile. Curves mean begin to let go. He walks the length once more, checking each wedge and latch without changing them, learning by touch what his hands will need to remember in the din. At the tri-chamber he returns the witness ring and slides the shard a fraction away from the glow. The messages are already clear, but he likes to leave them in a good seat for the next person who might look during the watch he will not be here to see. From the bucket he wets a cloth and presses it lightly against the arch seam where hairline gaps often wake under long heat. The cloth sizzles, then speaks no more. He smooths the damp with a thumb until the mortar feels whole. This is not for the firing, not anymore. It is for the kiln which will live to hold many other nights. The kettle on the sill sighs. He pours a little water into the cup, drinks, and wipes the brim with the back of his hand, a habit that holds no meaning beyond care. The stream below keeps counting. A first long note from the rooster in the lower field travels past and goes on to other roofs. He returns to the damper. Another reed width toward closed. Not all at once. The kiln dislikes suddenness. He remembers winters where the wind demanded a different ending, faster and firmer. Tonight the air has been kind. He lets the iron speak, then stays his palm on it a moment longer, storing the temperature in his hand so his body will know tomorrow what the last moments felt like. In front, the stoke door opens a last time. He does not feed it now, he only uses the ash rake to draw two clean lines through the bed so the fire can settle without clumping. Ash folds down with a warm whisper. He places the rake as always, handle angle to the same side, teeth away from the path so no one will stumble in later hours. Clay wads wait in a small dish. He kneads one with his thumb and forefinger until it yields and smooths, then presses it along the seam of the stoke door. Another wad seals the front spy, and a softer strip beds into the rear spy-ren. He does not make a perfect seal. The kiln should breathe out a little as it rests. He pushes the wedges home, then pulls them back a hair. The door becomes a door again, not a mouth. He writes the last few signs on the roof tile, a straight line for the long hole, a circle for the pond light inside, a small downward hook for the easing, and two short ticks that will remind him of the tiny feeds. He dusts the tile with his sleeve and sets it on the same ledge where other nights' tiles have rested. Later, perhaps after sleep, he will move those notes into the long book with dates and weathers and names of clays. For now, the tile is enough. The breeze carries pine and the faint sweetness of char. The plume at the roof thins to a pale thread, then to a vague warmth. He counts a slow 20 and listens for any complaint. None comes. He keeps counting. Nothing changes but the certainty that he can step away. He tidies the place where he sat, folds the mat from the stone edge, turns the cup upside down, coils the wet cloth over the bucket's rim so that will dry instead of sour. The tongs hang on their nail with the hinge open, as he was taught, so rust cannot make a joke of them. The try-brush lies across the jar with its hairs away from the glue line, another small habit that saves a future frustration. Down the slope, light collects in the pines without really arriving. A thin band at the horizon considers becoming morning. The world holds its pause very well. He lets his shoulders notice it. He will not open the kiln today, not tomorrow either. Celadon needs long patience after flame ends. The green waits in the cool, collecting itself as heat loosens its hold. 2 sleeps from now, perhaps 3, he will ease the door away with wedges and blocks, stones whisper against stone, and the first breath that comes out will smell like damp leaves after rain. He will touch nothing for a minute. He will look and listen. He will know what the night made. He thinks of that moment and then sets it aside. His work now is to leave well. He circles the kiln once more, hand to each latch, palm flat to the arch, fingers on the damper iron, foot along the worn path to the woodpile. Everything is where it should be. He writes a last, tiny mark on the tile, a dot in the corner, which means, to him alone, go rest. He walks down to the stream, rinses his hands in water that feels no, and dries them on the hand. The sky becomes a paler kind of dark. Back at the shed, he lays the ledger tile on the beam where morning eyes will find it. He loosens the knot of his coat and sits on the mat he will sleep on for a little while, within reach of the kiln's gentle warmth. The hillside makes no summary. It does not need one. The bulls and ewes inside the arch are doing their last, silent task. The night has kept all its small agreements. He closes his eyes. When he wakes, he will sweep right and carry ashes to the garden. Sometime later, green will show itself, a quiet, deep color that remembers pine breath and patient hands, and the village will have cups that hold water like weather. And as the fire's work settles into its long, cool memory, let us step softly to another room of careful hours where a low bench, a block of cherry wood, and a set of fine knives wait for lines to become a picture in Edo. We arrive in a small upstairs room that looks toward a tiled roof and a slice of pale morning. Paper screens drink the daylight and give it back as a soft wash. A low table stands near the window. On it waits a block of cherry wood, smooth and faintly sweet, wrapped overnight in a cloth to keep it from growing tired and dry. Beside the block, a cup of water, a folded rag, a narrow dish with rice paste the color of cream, and a neat row of knives and gouges, each with a handle worn to the shape of a particular hand. The carver settles on a cushion. He turns the block, taps it with his knuckles, hears the good, then sound. Cherry is used because it keeps a clean edge and does not splinter when asked to hold a hair-thin line. This block has been plain true. Its face lies level as a still pond. He unwraps a sheet that holds the artist's drawing, the key image brushed in sumi ink on thin paper. The lines are exact and alive. The paper will be pasted face down, because the finished print must read correctly when inked and pressed. He mixes a touch of water into the paste with a small bamboo spatula. The paste smells mild, like cool rice. With 2 fingers he spreads the thinnest coat over the wood, always in one direction, never puddling. The drawing goes on carefully, corner to corner, then is rubbed with a baron wrapped in fresh bamboo sheath. The rubbing is gentle, only enough to seep the inked lines into the grain. He leaves it to rest. While the paste finds its grip, he prepares his tools. The shallow tray holds stones, rough, medium, and very fine. He wets each and draws the knife edges along the surface at a steady angle, heel to tip, in patient strokes. The sound is a faint sand note. A little white slurry rises from the stone. He wipes the blade and checks the light along it. No flashes, no nicks. The small V-knife that will cut the outlines must be keen enough to feel like thought. Outside the window, get a clack on the lane below. A vendor sings a simple phrase about sweet buns. The room keeps its calm. Steam rolls once from a kettle and then settles. He pours a little tea into a cup and warms his hands around it. The smell of roasted leaf tucks itself into the wood scent. He returns to the block. The drawing now lies flat. He dampens a cloth and rubs the back until the paper grows soft. With the pad of a finger he tests a corner and then lifts the first veil. The top layer of the thin sheet peels away in soft threads, leaving a translucent skin of fibers that hug the ink. Pressed this close, the painted lines show through the paper and into the wood's shallow pores. The block has learned the picture. He sets the block on a low support so his wrist will be steady. With the V-knife he makes the first cuts, called outlining or opening the lines. The blade enters just outside the ink so the printed stroke will hold its fullness. He draws the knife toward himself, small lengths at a time, following the curve of a sleeve, the arc of a boat's rope, the corner of an eyelid. The noise is close to nothing, a dry whisper and a breath. At each turn he lifts the knife and resets. He does not hurry. A print starts here in patience. In Edo, pictures on paper are the work of many hands. A designer imagines and draws. A carver gives the lines to wood. A printer will later brush color and press paper against the block with a round, twine pad called a baron. A publisher arranges the whole dance. This thought sits somewhere in the room but does not need to be said. He knows his portion and tends it. When a curve is fragile, he uses a smaller blade with a steeper angle. Round tiny spaces the white between eyelashes. The feather edge of mist he alternates left and right cuts so the strand of line stays standing, thin as grass. He wipes the tip on the rag often. A clean point behaves better than a proud one. Clearing begins beside the cut lines. He takes a U-gouge as light as a reed and removes a thread of wood from the waist area. The aim is to free the black outline so it can hold ink later. Deeper clearing will come after. Now he only makes a safe moat. Where a large white field will appear in the print, he marks it with a small cross of pencil so the hand will not drift and nibble where it should not. On the block's lower left corner, he sketches to shallow registration marks Gento. One is an L-shaped notch, the other is a straight step. They will be carved later and used by the printer to seat each sheet in the exact same place every time, color after color. It is a humble pair of cuts, but it keeps order among many sheets and many blocks. He pauses to stretch his fingers. He dips them in water and presses them together. The room's air is neither wet nor dry. Today the wood behaves kindly. On days when winter air steals moisture, A cloth over a bowl might sit nearby to ease the block's mood. On summer days the windows stand more open, and the tools sweat a little in the hand. Today is easy. He takes a swallow of tea and returns to the curve he left. The face in the design slowly wakes as he frees the features, but he does not think of face. He thinks of weight of line and how it meets the next line. The artist's brush once moved with changing pressure, thin then fat, then thin again. Wood must imitate this with two edges of a cut. To make a taper, he narrows one side of the trench and lets the other stand more upright. The result on paper will feel like a brush even though it is no brush at all. He reaches a patch of fine pattern, perhaps a woven sash or a screen of rain. These require a different tool, an asukio, almost flat and spoon-shaped. He uses it to skate across the surface, taking hair-thin shavings from between lines so the high parts remain. The shavings curl and fall in pale commas onto the cloth in his lap. Every few minutes he lifts the cloth by its corners and tips the small pile into a basket so his forearms stay clean. A sparrow lands on the window-sill and flicks a glance. He does not move. The sparrow leaves a mark of sound and hops away. The room resets to its soft percussive rhythm, knife, breath, knife, breath. In a far courtyard, someone taps a bucket rim with a dipper, the tone rises and is gone. When he meets a long, straight edge in the drawing, maybe the side of a railing, he rests a bone straight edge of fingers width from the line and draws the knife along it. The bone gives the guide but will not dull the blade as metal might. He listens to the friction in the cut. A clean hiss is good. A dry scrape says the angle is wrong. He corrects without judgment. At midday, he will proof a small part of the key block. For now he continues the opening work until a section feels whole. He brushes the surface with the wide, soft brush to lift dust that might bruise a delicate ridge, then blows gently to find any loose hairs of wood. Where a corner threatens to catch a fingertip later, he rounds it by a breath. He looks up and lets his eyes land on a point far beyond the room. Rest keeps the line true. He flexes his knuckles and rolls his shoulders once. On the bench edge, a little dish holds a narrow band of candle wax. He rubs a trace along the knife back so the glide stays easy in tight turns. The day goes on in this very small way, one stroke placed where it belongs, one space cleared so the paper will be quiet there. The afternoon light shifts toward warmer. He has opened much of the central figure and begun to free the wide space around it. The block surface now shows islands of raised design surrounded by low, neat fields. He brushes again, places the cloth over the block to keep dust at bay, and sets his tools in a row for a brief pause and a bite of rice. The work has moved forward by a measure that seems tiny to the eye and complete to the hand. When he returns, he will begin the deeper clearing and the first small proof to see if the lines hold as they should. For now the room holds the quiet shape of a picture becoming itself in wood, and the afternoon waits politely at the window. He lifts the cloth from the block and breathes once into his hands to wake the fingers. Morning's pale wash has shifted. The light now carries a little honey. The first task is to make the white fields truly white. He sets the key knife aside and chooses an asuki, the shallow, spoon chisel that skates rather than digs. Its edge has been polished to a soft gleam. He lays the steel almost flat and draws it across the wood in patient lanes, shaving thin ribbons from the low areas between the raised lines. Each pass brightens the surface by a whisper. When the Asuki meets a tight corner, he switches to a tiny U-gouge, turning the block rather than his wrist so the cut follows the grain's quiet wishes. He keeps the tool low. Deep gouge would cast a hard shadow and invite accidental smudges when ink is brushed later. 2 or 3 grains below the printing surface is enough. Round delicate hairs and eyelash width strokes, he leaves little bridges of wood while he works the wider clearings, then returns and flicks the bridges away with the very tip of a knife. The room fills with the light scent of cherry and a faint drying music as steel meets fiber. A flat brush follows, sweeping shavings into a neat crescent at the mat's edge. Now the humble guides that will govern every sheet, the kento. He has already penciled their positions. With the small knife he cuts the L-shaped corner notch called the kagi on the lower right. The cut is shallow but crisp, an exact seat for the paper's corner. On the lower left he carves the straight edge notch the hikitsu where the paper side will rest. Printer and carver seldom speak while working, but they speak through these marks. If the kento are true, color blocks will meet the key lines like doors fitting frames. He checks their edges with a sliver of card. No fuzz, no rounded lips. He burnishes the bottoms of the kento just slightly with a smooth bone so damp paper will slide in without catching. A tiny pencil dot notes the block's top. Later, when many blocks lie side by side, the mark will keep north and south from trading places. He covers the carved areas with a thin cloth and brings the block to the proofing board. Proofs will not look like finished prints. They are tests checking whether lines breathe the way the designer's brush breathes, whether a taper reads as intended, whether a space wants another hair taken away. On a low shelf rests a dish of sumi ink, a small lump of paste, and a soft, wide brush hake bound in string. He stirs a little paste into the ink with a bamboo stick. Paste keeps the brush from flooding the block and helps the pigment sit nicely on the raised lines. He dampens a sheet of hosho paper, not wet, only calm to the touch, then lays it aside under cloth so the moisture spreads evenly. Paper that is too dry will not conform. Paper that is too wet will stretch and blur. Many tasks in this craft live between too much and too little. He finds that easy to live with. He loads the hake with a small charge of inky gray and strokes it across the block in parallel sweeps. Not much. The ink kisses the raised lines, darkening them to slate. The cleared fields stay pale. He lays the damp sheet into the kento corner first. Then the side and smooths it lightly with his palm. The baron comes next, a round pad under a braided bamboo sheath. Today's sheath is fresh. He wrapped it last night, folding the corners under like a little package. He sets the baron down and rubs in steady circles, medium pressure. Listening for the dry squeak that means contact is good. The sound is a familiar companion. Never loud, never shy. He lifts the sheet from the side, slow to keep from tearing an eyelash-thin ridge. The first proof shows itself. Gray lines on white, the picture reversed, crisp where the knife was sure, soft where the block asked for another minute. He pins the proof at eye level with 2 bamboo pegs and stands back, wiping his hands on the cloth. Evaluation is a quiet task. He looks for the places where the printed line has swollen slightly, where the knife cut too far from the inked edge, or where the line appears starved and timid. On one sleeve hem, the line comes to a point a hair early. He makes a tiny mark on the proof with cinnabar ink, then finds the spot on the block and scrapes 1 breath more from the outside of the line so the point will carry a little longer. A curl lifts and falls. He pulls a second proof of that area, a small slip rather than a whole sheet, to confirm the change. At a different corner, a minuscule chip of wood lingers where the Isuki's pass was too kind. He slides a sliver away and touches the spot with the smooth handle of a tool to tame any burr. Where a long straight needs crispness, he returns to the bone-straight edge and the key knife, renewing the wall of the line so ink will sit with dignity and not wander. He studies the face again. The eyelid line is tender. Taking too much would make the glance hollow, leaving too much would make it heavy. He sharpens the knife on the fine stone to strokes only, and then kisses the outside of the line so lightly the touch would hardly move a hair. The knife knows this dance. It has been here many times, in this house and in other rooms across the city. A carriage creaks on the lane outside. Voices pass and thin. Somewhere a crow coughs. The proof dries while he eats two rice bowls and a pickled plum from a cloth. Lunch is less meal than pause, a way to mark the day's middle. He sets the cup of tea near the block to share its steam with the wood, keeping the grain content and straight. He looks again at the proof's overall field. The cleared areas are clean still. He deepens a few broad grounds to avoid accidental smutting when the printer charges a full brush for color later. He uses the larger Isuki in long gliding strokes, watching the light move across the satin floor he leaves behind. In one broad white, he textures the surface with faint cross-hatching from the back of the knife almost invisible. This tiny tooth will keep paper from sealing to the block too hard and pulling at delicate stems. He carves the kento a shade deeper, checking with the card. He prints a second full proof. This one he numbers and notes with a brush block name, date, weather sign. Clear, mild. Raft memory lives not only in hands, but in small marks that let another day talk to this one. He lays the first and second proof side by side. The differences are quiet. That is what he wants. There is a tiny break in a long hairline, no cause for alarm, but he decides to strengthen the path on either side so the printer's brush can carry color there without flooding. He trims a hair from each bank of the trench, leaving the height unchanged but the road a touch broader. If a line ever must be replaced completely, he can fit a sliver of new cherry sugi into the wand so finely I cannot find the seam. Not today. Today, the wood has been obedient. Toward late afternoon the key block feels honest. He wipes it gently with the brush, then with a damp cloth, and finally with a dry one. Bekento sits square. The proofs hang like two quiet opinions that agree. He rubs a whisper of camellia oil onto the metal of each tool to keep rust away, then sets them in order by size and task. In a ledger he writes 3 short lines. Key lines opened. Kento cut. Proofs good, sleeve hem lengthened. He lowers the window screen to soften the light and sits for a moment with nothing in his hands. The next labor will begin with these proofs, separating colors and tones, deciding which shapes share a block and which need their own. Each color block will use the same kento, so that sky, robe, railing, and shadow fall exactly where the key line invites them. But the thinking for that belongs to the coming hour. He drapes the cloth over the block and stands. The room holds the scent of wood and ink, the hush of work that went where it should. On the wall, the second proof dries flat, ready to become guides for color. The day is longer behind him than ahead. That is enough. the afternoon grows round and even. He takes the second proof from the pegs and spreads it on the bench. Its gray paths will become roads for color. With a small dish of Aobanidae flower blue that dries fast and washes away, he touches a reed brush to the proof and breathes a pale map into being. Here, a gentle field behind the figure. There, the robe's broad areas, one for the outer layer, one for the lining that only peeks at the sleeve, a thin band for the sash, a square of railing to posts and the shadow they make. The face and hands get their own comp shapes. Nothing hurried. Each contour follows the key lines, but with a little space inside them so color will tuck under the black and look tidy when printed. He chooses a new plank of cherry, already planed flat, and sized with a thin wash of glue to keep fibers settled. In the lower right and left he transfers the Kento positions from the key block, measuring twice, then cutting the L and the straight notch to match. He tests with the card again. The mouth of each notch is crisp, the floor is smooth and level. These small corners are the bridges between blocks. He treats them like corners of a tiny house. He brushes the back of the proof lightly with rice paste, thins the paste with a whisper of water, and carries the sheet to the block. Face down, corner into Kento, side into Kento, then the rest. He smooths from the center out with the barren so no bubbles hide underneath. The dayflower ink bleeds a little, just enough to make the lines clear through the paper. He lets the paste take hold a few breaths, then lifts the damp cloth and presses again. The proof is now a skin on the wood, ready to become edges. He sharpens the small knife and begins with the outlines of the largest color field, the background that will print a light wash. He cuts just inside the Aobana line so the color shape will sit a hair shy of the key. The knife walks with care. At once the paper peels up in fine curls, and the wood accepts the path. He clears a little trench along the line, then switches to a broader gouge and lowers the surrounding ground. The raised island that remains is the color itself. For broad areas he keeps the top very even, sanding lightly with a worn slip of shark skin to soften any tool rings. Flatness matters. A small hollow would take less ink and print as a pale freckle. Near the edge where he imagines a soft gradient bokashi, he bevels the raised area gently, almost to nothing, like a shore. The printer will brush color lightly there and pull it toward the center, and the bevel will help the paper meet the fade with kindness. He notes a tiny mark in the margin, bokashi north. It is not a command, just a friendly suggestion for later. He moves to the robe. The outer robe receives one block, the lining another, so the printer can keep their moods different. On the outer robe he keeps inner corners slightly rounded. Sharp bays can catch paste and tear paper when dozens of sheets pass in steady rhythm. For the sash, he carves a clean band and leaves a small ridge in the middle that can be knocked down later if the line prints too boldly. He carves the hand shapes last, resting his wrist on a little pillow so the knife's path stays calm even when breath moves through him. When the pasted proof has lost its damp shine, he lifts the paper scraps from the carved trenches with the tip of a brush and touches a drop of water to the places where fibers cling. The Aobana melts and pulls away, leaving the wood clean and pale. The bench now holds a second block with raised islands, a quiet geography of color. He takes a thin slip of the key proof, aligns it in the Kento, and prints a light sumi impression over the color block with the Heiken Baron. Lines fall exactly where they should. He studies the registration. A rogue corner meets its black with a neat overlap, the sash sits under its outline, the background clears the key halo without a gap. He smiles a little at the small satisfactions that no one else will ever see. And not the size of a seed shows in the cherry near the lower margin. It will not touch a printed area, but he inlays a sliver of new wood sugi to keep the surface placid. He fits the wedge so close the seam hides from sight, then burnishes it with bone till light slides over it without a hitch. The block returns to being plain and reliable. He repeats the process for a third plank, another set of kento cut in the same places, another paste down of the proof, this time selecting only the railing and posts. The cuts feel faster. His hands know the building by now. Small boxes, thin rails, two little gaps where light hits. The trenching here can be deeper. The printer will use a firmer brush and more paste for these simple shapes. On a fourth plank he isolates the shadows just enough ink to suggest depth under the rail and along the robe's lower fold. He does not crowd the block with too many islands. A printer's brush needs room to breathe. Between blocks he pauses and writes tiny notes on each margin. A printer's alphabet of hints: light wash, robe 1, lining, rail, shadow. And a small circle marking where to charge paste first for smooth pull. He draws a narrow arrow to show the direction of brushing for the gradient. None of this is required, all of it is helpful. The printer will know what to do, but it is pleasant when wood speaks softly with the same voice as the hand that shaped it. He sets the 4 color blocks in a neat square. The key block rests nearby, cloth laid over it to keep dust off. He prints a registration proof with the key block, then places each color block on the bench and lays the proof over them in turn, holding it to the light to see how shapes align. The kento do their quiet work. Shapes nest within lines like bowls together on a shelf. In late light he prepares a handful of trial pigments, not to print carvers, leave that to printers, but to imagine weight and spread. In shells on the windowsill sit small cakes, indigo for a gentle blue, vermilion for a robe touch, gamboge for a warm wash that might live behind the figure, and sooting for the shadow. He wets 1 cake with 2 drops, makes a little circle on the proof's margin, and watches how the color sits against the sumi. This is not prescription, only courtesy. The printer will mix with rice paste and water on the block, making the hues walk or rest as needed. He cleans the bench and sweeps the shavings into a paper twist for the stove. The room quiets. He returns to the first color block and, with the fine asuki, softens 1 inner corner where paper might snag, then deepens the motor on a delicate island so it stands proud enough to ink but not so tall it will leave an edge mark. Everything he does is a series of small preventions. Trouble avoided is a pleasure you never meet. When the light finally thins, he gathers proofs and blocks and slides them into a flat drawer, where they will sleep without warping. The kento faces are rubbed once with bone to keep them smooth. He writes a last note in the ledger. For color blocks opened. Registration true. Background bevel for bokashi. He stands at the door and listens to the street, a peddler's stick, a neighbor closing a shutter, a child's rubbery laugh trailing away. In the near dark the blocks are only shapes, but in his mind he can feel the smooth shoulders of each island and the calm floors around them. Tomorrow, the printer will visit to look over the plan, to talk about tones and order, which colors should come first, how wet the paper should be, where a wiping rag should catch the brush at the end of its stroke. For now the work has arrived at a pause that feels like the answer to a long, easy question. He pinches the lamp lower and sets the baron to rest under its cloth. The room smells faintly of cherried paste and tea. Morning brings a cooler light and a gentle knock. The printer steps inside with a polite bow and sets his bundle on the bench. He carries a wrapped baron, a roll of soft brushes, 2 thin boards for keeping paper flat, and a small lidded jar of rice paste that still remembers warmth. They talk quietly, almost in sketches. The order of colors, the places for a soft fade, which wash should sit under which line. The carver lays out the key block and 4 color blocks, turning each so the Kento corners face the printer like little open doors. They choose an order that feels like breathing. First a pale background to settle the paper. Then the robe lining, light and calm. After that the outer robe, a tone heavier but still modest. The railing follows plain and sure. A soft shadow last, to tuck the figure into place. The key block, with its black outlines, will wait until the end. This keeps the edges clean and lets the color hide just under the lines. The printer unwraps his baron. Inside the round tool, a coiled cord lives beneath a bamboo skin, making a quiet rasp when the pad moves in circles. He checks the baron's face, rubs a little camellia oil into the surface, and sets it aside. From his roll he selects broad hake brushes, flat, soft, and thirsty, and warms their hairs between his palms. He opens the jar of paste. It holds a mild, sweet smell. Paste will make the ink kind to paper and help colors travel smoothly across the blocks. The printer lifts the paper boards. Between them rests a stack of dampened sheets, soft hosho made from kazo fiber, cool to the touch, and even in their moisture. He checks the edges with a fingertip. Not too wet, not too dry. The sheets will take color without buckling and release from the wood without clinking. He covers them again to keep the balance steady. They begin with the background block. The printer lays it on the bench, seats the Kento against the stop on his workboard, and holds it with 2 small pegs. He stirs a light blue-green on the block itself, dipping the hake into water first, then paste, then pigment from a small dish. He brushes in slow, even strokes from right to left, then left to right, keeping the liquid in a thin, shining film. At the top edge he adds 1 extra sweep, and then, with a clean, almost dry brush, draws the color upward just a finger's breadth to prepare for a soft gradient. He takes the first sheet from the board, aligns the corner into the L-shaped Kento, slides the side edge into the straight notch, and lowers the paper like a lid. The baron sits in his hand with the flat of his palm across the back. He presses in circles, first over the Kento, then across the whole form, listening as the bamboo talks softly to wood. A breath later, he lifts the sheet from the top edge. The wash lies even and pale, with the faintest deepening near the upper margin, like dawn thinking of a cloud. They hang the first impression on a string and reach for the next sheet. A rhythm begins. Brush, brush, brush. Paper down. Baron turns. Sheet lifts. The carver watches each pull and notes how the color sits. On the 4th sheet, the upper fade shows a little line where the brush ran dry. The printer adjusts without comment, adding a touch more water to the hake and shifting his last stroke a finger lower. The next pull smooths the band as if it never tried to appear. When a dozen sheets carry their background, they pause. The printer rinses the brush in a basin, and wipes the block's face with a damp cloth, hunting any stray puddle with the corner of the rag. The carver runs a fingertip lightly over the raised island. It is level and at ease. They set the block aside and move to the lining of the robe. The lining block is smaller and more intricate. The printer mixes a gentle vermilion with more paste than before, making the paint velvety. He brushes with shorter strokes to keep color from wandering. He places the paper into the kento. Again, Baron circles trace a path along the lining shape. When he lifts the sheet, the lining sits just inside where the key line will later lie. The overlap is so slight you notice it only if you are looking for it. They print 10 sheets and stop to check edges. One inner corner looks a touch heavy, just a hint of pooling. The carver takes the block and, with the fine Asuki gouge, softens that inside turn, knocking down a tiny bump no wider than a hair. The next pull lands even. Now the outer robe. The color is deeper, something that could be indigo mixed with a little soot to quiet it. The printer tests on a scrap and then on a sheet that already holds background and lining. The robe prints with fullness, but does not shout. He works along the shape, stretching his barren strokes, then shortening them at the sleeve edge so the pressure does not squeeze color past the border. Between prints he charges the block with more pigment and a dab of paste, tapping the brush near the center of the island so the edges stay tidy. A brief rest. Tea in small cups, held in both hands. They sit near the open window. Outside, a vendor pauses with a sing-song call and a pole across his shoulders. Inside, the room stays slow and small. The carver writes a note in the ledger. Robe heavy, mix loves more paste. Inside, corner eased, the railing block goes quickly. Straight shapes accept color without fuss, and the printer's baron finds them by feel. He prints, lifts, prints, lifts. The baron's voice is a hushed rasp, like paper whispering to itself. A shallow notch near one peg catches a drop of color on the 9th sheet. The printer wipes the kento and adds a sliver of damp papery tegami there to keep the corner tight and clean. The next pull leaves no trace of the mishap. For the shadow, they make a wash so thin it looks like the memory of soot in water. Paste glues the idea of the color to the block. The brush kisses only the lower part of the island. The upper edge is left almost dry. The printer lowers the sheet, then uses a different baron with a softer face, sliding it lightly so the shadow arrives with grace. When he lifts the paper, the figure owns a small weight under the robe, and the rail sits quietly on its posts. Now the room holds a neat ladder of prints on the string, each sheet a little more complete than the last. The key block waits, covered with its cloth. The printer clears the bench, rinses, brushes, and wipes his hands until they are free from paste shine. The carver places the key block into the pegs. The printer grinds fresh ink, balancing water and black to make a satin line. He works the hake in the pool until the bristles carry tone without drips. He brushes along the raised lines into directions, then one more time to settle the ink in place. Paper down. Baron circles begin small, over the face and the hands, then travel along the robe, across the railing, and along the margin where the title will someday live. He lists the sheet. Black lines join the colors like silk thread sinking into cloth. The outline is not loud, it is present. It gives the shapes their edges, and then steps back. They print 5 with extra care, testing slight changes. On one sheet the baron lingers an extra breath at the corner of the eye, and the line grows heavy. They mark that pull with a tiny pencil dot and adjust the pressure on the necks. On another sheet a small area of the key block looks a touch starved where the island is very thin. The carver rubs that raised strip with a sliver of bone to wake the grain, and the ink picks up better thereafter. By late afternoon a small edition of proofs hangs, and dries enough to understand how the blocks sing together. They lay several on the bench in a row. The first and last look like relatives, same scene, same quiet. Between them the steps of adjustment show as tiny differences a casual eye would never see. They speak softly about the order for a full run, about ray dampening the paper stack tomorrow if the weather shifts, about keeping the paste jar covered so the skin does not thicken and make little clots on the block. The printer wraps his baron and brushes. The carver stacks the blocks in their drawer, placing thin paper between faces so no dust will kiss the raised forms. The room returns to its clean lines. The scent of rice paste fades to almost nothing. Outside, evening begins to fold the street. Inside, the first complete print rests on the bench, calm and finished enough to imagine how 100 will look in a neat pile. The carver runs a fingertip along the margin, never on the ink, and feels the dry tooth of the paper. The printer bows and steps out into the lane with the proofs and a folder under his arm. The door closes with a friendly sound. The day's labor lies in ordered stacks and quiet tools. Tomorrow they will make more. Tonight the blocks sleep. Morning returns with soft air and the smell of damp paper. The carver opens the drawer and checks each block. He touches only the bare margin. He looks for a chip that might have lifted, a grain that might have raised. All is calm. He sets the blocks in the order they will work: background, lining, robe, railing, shadow, and key. The printer arrives with quiet steps and bows at the door. He carries new paste, a jar of black, and a wrapped baron that has been recorded overnight. They speak in few words. Today is for the run. The paper stack has rested under boards and cloth. The moisture is even from corner to corner. The printer tests one sheet with a thumb. Good. He unwraps the baron and rubs the bamboo skin with a breath of camellia oil so it will slide. He warms the hake brushes in his hands. The paste is stirred until it turns like soft rice. They begin with a steady rhythm they will keep for hours. Brush the block. Place the sheet in the kento. Circle the baron. Lift the sheet. Hang it on the string. Repeat. The background flows first, pale and even. The printer pauses every few sheets to wipe the kento clean with a folded rag. A grain of paste in the corner can mark a margin, so he watches the corners as if they were eyes. The lining follows. The color is quiet vermilion. The block is smaller, so the barren circles are tighter, like little storms that never become weather. The printer's shoulders roll and settle. His hand knows when the paste is thinning before his eye sees it. He taps the brush again and smooths the stroke. The carver sits close and watches the edges. If a line darkens on one sheet, he notes which patch of the block might need a whisper from the Asuki later. The robe goes next. The mix has a touch more paste to keep the color soft. The printer lays the sheet and presses longer at the sleeve. He moves the baron with care near the inner elbow so the ink does not creep. The robe arrives even and calm on each page. The room now holds a ladder of prints at many stages. Early ones are sky and breath. Later ones hold clothes and rails. All of them wait for their lines. Between colors they rest the blocks face up a moment, then wipe them with a damp cloth to keep pigment from drying on the island. The printer rinses the hake, squeezes the water with 2 fingers, and combs the hairs with a thumb. The tools answer the touch as if they are small, patient animals. The railing prints with steady speed. The shadow last, laid with a softer baron and a gentler hand. It tucks the figure into the scene. The printer changes his pressure as he moves so the shadow fades like breath under the rail. On one sheet the shadow shews a faint edge where the brush paused. He takes a separate, almost dry hake and feathers the wet color on the block itself. The next impression loses the edge. The wash turns smooth. Now the room is ready for the key block. They pause. The carver wipes the key block with a clean cloth and inspects the fine lines for any lint. He takes the bone slip and lightly polishes a very thin stroke where yesterday the ink was shy. The printer grinds fresh black. The smell is clean and small. He brushes the lines into directions and checks that no puddle glints at a corner. Then he lays the first finished sheet. The baron moves with more weight now, but never harshly. Over the face. Over the hands. Along the robe. Across the rail. Or on the outer border. He lists the sheet. The outline stitches the picture together. The colors become one quiet thing. He hangs it up and takes the next sheet. The room fills with the calm rust of bamboo and the tiny click of pegs as blocks are lifted and set down. Outside, a peddler's ravel comes and goes. Inside, the edition grows in order. Every dozen pulls, the printer stops and wipes the margins of the block and the pegs of his workboard. He turns the baron's face a little to even the wear on the bamboo. If the skin grows tired, he has a spare wrapped in cloth. By midday, a neat count of prints hangs drying in rows. The carver turns a sheet toward the light. He watches for set-off, ink kissing the back of the sheet behind it. The air is fair and not too damp. No marks appear. They keep working. The day narrows, and the run finds its middle. Hands move, not faster, just steadier. The printer's breath sets the pace slow in, slow out. The baron answers the breath without thinking. Late in the day they stop for a special touch the publisher has asked for. The night reel will carry a hint of shimmer on a few prints. The carver brings a tiny tray. The printer mixes a very thin paste with water and brushes a clear film in a narrow band on the rail shape. He lowers a sheet and presses lightly. He lifts it, and, while the film still holds, dusts a whisper of mica across the damp band. He taps the paper from the back so the flakes seat in the paste. When it dries, the rail will shine just enough to catch a lamp, not more. They finish the key lines for the last stack as the light fades. The printer sets the baron down and rinses the hake one final time. The carver places each block face up to dry for a short while, then lays soft paper over the islands and stacks the blocks under light boards so they will not warp. He writes in the ledger, edition pulled. Mica on rail 5 sheets, key even. Corners clean. The prints come down from the strings when they are safe to touch. They stack in 2s and 10s. A thin paper slides between every fifth sheet to help the drying continue without sticking. The printer counts softly. The carver adds a note on the back of the first sheet, small and neat, with the title and the day. The publisher's seal will go in the margin later. A red artist seal, carved long ago, waits in a little box if the designer chooses to mark the proof. They review a small plan for tomorrow. The stack will go to the publisher in the morning. He will check margins, tie the bundles with flat cords, and send copies to the shops. Some sheets may live in a window where light will find them. Others will be kept in a drawer, to be lifted and looked at when evening is quiet. The rest will travel with a peddler and a song. The printer wraps his baron in bamboo leaves to keep the skin tender. He dries the brushes in a row, hairs shaped and ready. The carver wipes the bench with a damp cloth, catching each pale shaving from the morning. He looks once more at the key block under lamplight. The lines lie smooth and shallow, strong but not proud. He covers the face with paper and slides it home. The room holds the hush of finished work. Ink rests in the dish like a small lake in evening. Paste cools to a skin that will be peeled away and thrown out. The kento on the bench glints with a thin film of water and then dries to dull again. The edition waits, the picture calm, the paper with a soft body and a faint sound if you bend it near your ear. The printer bows in the doorway. The carver returns the bow and lets the door fall to its latch. He stands a moment with the top sheet in his hand, not to admire but to be sure. The lines say yes. He slides the sheet back into its place. He sets his tools to sleep in their tray. He lowers the lamp wick, and the room answers by becoming the color of cedar and paper. Outside, a shopkeeper closes a shutter. A gate swings once and then is still. Inside, the blocks and brushes rest. Tomorrow there will be the delivery, the ledger mark, and perhaps the start of a new design. For tonight, the picture is finished enough to be quiet. Now these stories will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.